Naruto clapped his hands together as he looked at the 3 genin who were with him at Training Ground 7. He had spoken with Tsunade and their sensei Ebisu and had managed to get their permission to train these 3 for the Chunin exams finals. Standing in front of him were Konohamaru, Moegi and Udon. It was his plan to train these 3 during the 1-month hiatus. While he had seen that these 3 were decent for genin, Naruto knew they would need to be better. Especially when they ended up fighting the Kiri genin, who from what he had seen, were much better than any of the other genin in the exams. "All right," Naruto said as he looked between the 3 genin, "I'm sure you all know why you are here. I plan on training you for this month before the Chunin exams. I'll be training you guys in all facets of the ninja way." Naruto paused for a second as the 3 genin looked absolutely ecstatic. "However, before we get started on your training, I want to see how well you 3 perform. While I've seen how the 3 of you fight during the preliminaries, I've always been of the belief that you never truly know what others are capable of unless you battle them yourselves." Naruto reached into his pouch and pulled out 2 bells, attaching them to his pants as he turned to the 3 genin. "Your jobs will be to get these 2 bells from me using everything trick you can think of. Don't worry," Naruto said as he saw Moegi open her mouth to speak, "you don't have to worry about actually getting a bell. I will be training all of you regardless of whether any of you get a bell. I merely wish to see what you're capable of." Also, the smirk quirked at the corner of Naruto's lips as he stared at the 3. "You 3 will need to come at me with the intent to kill, if you want any hopes of even laying a scratch on me." The 3 genin's eyes widened, causing Naruto's smirk to increase. For a moment everyone in the clearing was silent, until Naruto decided to get the fun started. "Oh well, what are waiting for? The test starts now." With that the 3 genin took off, moving to hide into the trees. Naruto chuckled as his enhanced senses were able to find their locations easily enough. While they were decent for genin and may give Chunin a good while to detect, they were no match for someone who made a hobby of hiding from the Umbu in his youth. The blonde shinobi reached into his pouch, activating one of the many containment seals in it. There was a poof of smoke as Naruto pulled out an apple. Taking an exaggerated bite out the juicy fruit, Naruto concentrated on the chakra signatures of the 3 genin who were hiding just a little to his left in the tree line. Several minutes later Konohamaru burst out of the trees, tossing kunai and shuriken at Naruto in an effort to distract him. Naruto used the hand that was not eating an apple to catch all of the projectiles before putting them in his pouch. As he turned his attention to the spiky-haired genin, Naruto felt foreign chakra invading his coils and smirked. He discreetly released the genjutsu Moegi tried to cast on him, making Konohamaru shimmer before his position changed. The young Sarutobi heir was unaware of this as he continued his charge, jumping into the air and launching a kick at Naruto. Said blonde merely disappeared the moment Konohamaru's kick would have connected, making the genin stumble to the ground and look around before freezing as a voice spoke up behind him. "You know you should never let your enemies get behind you," Naruto spoke up with his hands held in the tiger sign. Konohagakuur Hiden Taijutsu Oji Senin Goroshi. Hidden Leaf Village Secret Technique, 1000 Years of Pain. Before Konohamaru could even turn his head, Naruto sent his chakra-induced fingers up, giving the young genin what amounted to a glorified ass poke. Gaiha! Konohamaru flew nearly 40 feet into the air, holding his hands to his ass before splashing into the river. Naruto chuckled as he stood back up. He had always wanted to do that after his genin test. Looking in the water where Konohamaru splashed down, Naruto smirked. Now all he had to do was wait and see what the 3 would do next. Naruto grinned as he looked at the 3 genin, all of whom were tied to one of the posts for not getting a bell. He knew it did not really matter if they got one or not, but it was still fun to have someone besides himself getting tied to them. They had actually been pretty decent for genin. While they had not been able to even touch him, Naruto knew that many of their strategies could have taken out a chunin and given a few of the village's jonin a run for their money. Well, despite not getting a bell, I have to admit you 3 did pretty good, Naruto complimented them, getting a smile from the tied-up genin. Now that I have a clear understanding of your skills and a basis to work with, we'll begin training." 3 Kagebushins appeared behind the genin and cut them from their bindings. "Now then, this is going to be our schedule for this month. In the morning we're going to do physical exercises and sparring, afternoons will be for chakra control, tactics, jutsu and anything else I feel you may need." Naruto looked up at the sun. since we still have a little bit of time before lunch, we're going to do some physical exercise. Naruto turned to the 3 genin and gave them a grin that sent shivers down their spines. Alright you 3. I want you 3 to start off with 20 laps around the training field, then do 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 50 pull-ups, 50 squats, 100 log punches with each arm and 100 log kicks with each leg. The Konohamaru Corps looked at him with wide eyes, while their minds tried to comprehend what Naruto was telling them to do. Naruto saw this and got a tick mark on his head. Didn't you hear me? Get moving! That seemed to shock the genin into action as they jumped up and got started, beginning with the laps around the training ground. Naruto grinned as he watched the 3 work. He had not told them, but this was about half of what he had done when he started training seriously under Ero-sensei. He had thought about making them do the full routine, but in the end decided against it. After all, they did not have a demonic fox sealed in their gut, so they could not heal muscles tears like he could. It took about 4 hours for the 3 to finish. When they did, Konohamaru, Moegi and Udon were all lying on the ground, looking like they might die of exhaustion. Not bad you guys, Naruto complimented the genin, who were too tired to even cast him a glare, though not for lack of trying. Naruto reached into his pouch and pulled out a scroll, unrolling it on the floor and unsealing its content with a puff of smoke. When the smoke dispersed, it revealed what could only be considered a picnic buffet. On top of a blanket were a cacophony of different kinds of foods. Before we get started on the next part of training, I want you guys to eat up and get your energy back, Naruto said, blinking as the previously exhausted genin suddenly appeared right next to him and began eating. Naruto let them get their food before getting some for himself. He ignored the genin who were stuffing their face as he ate, letting his mind wander over to the 3's performance, both during the preliminaries and the spar. He looked back and waited for them to finish stuffing themselves before speaking about their training. Glad to see you 3 are full. Naruto reached into his pouch again and this time pulled out 3 slips of paper, handing one to each of the now confused genin. I want you 3 to channel some chakra into that paper, Naruto explained as he saw their confused expressions. This will tell you what your elemental affinity is. If it's fire, it burns; wind, it will cut; water, it will soak; earth, it will turn to dust; and lightning will crinkle. By knowing what your affinity is, we will be able to find out which elemental jutsu you are most suited for. Eager to see what their affinity was for, the 3 genin channeled chakra into their paper. Moegi's became soaking wet, showing she had a fairly strong affinity for water. Udon surprisingly became crinkled, showing he had a lightning affinity. However, the most surprising to Naruto was Konohamaru's, which had one side get lit on fire and the other turn to dust. It looks like each of you have different elements, Naruto said with a nod to himself as he thought up how best to train them. Resealing the picnic basket and blanket, Naruto stood up and made 2 kagebushins. One of them went over to Moegi and the other went over to Udon. I want each of you to follow one of us and we'll teach you how to use your affinity. As Udon and Moegi followed their clone, Naruto turned to look at Konohamaru. Before we get started on your elemental training, I want to know how you're doing with that jutsu I gave you before I left. Not good Oyabun, boss, Konohamaru admitted as he rubbed the back of his neck and gained a sheepish expression. It's just so hard. I have no clue how to do it. I haven't even gotten past the first step. Naruto nodded. I expected that much. It's a pretty hard jutsu. Thankfully, now that I'm back in Konoha, I can help you get it down. We're also going to work on that as well as your element. Naruto paused for a moment as he chose what they would focus on first. Making his decision, Naruto gestured for Konohamaru to follow him. The blonde walked up to one of the many trees, and using a bit of wind manipulation cut off several leaves and made them float into his hand. Turning to Konohamaru, he handed him the leaves, said genin merely blinked before looking up at him with a what the hell expression. Naruto chuckled as he began to explain, the key to the exercise we are going to be doing is using your chakra to light these leaves on fire. Now then, fire is a very wild element and to use it you must. Clone Naruto and Moegi stopped walking as they came to a small river. Turning to the orange-haired girl, Naruto began to explain what they would be doing. The first thing you have to understand about water is that water always has a flow or a rhythm, even when supposedly still. Water is also one of the most versatile elements you can use, and while it does not have the raging power of, say, fire, it is still very strong in its own right. Now most water techniques are defensive or supplemental in nature, such as the Sujin Hiki or the Baku Swishoha. Because of this, the more offensive jutsu normally require a longer string of hand signs, since water was not naturally designed to hurt others. Naruto paused to look at Moegi. Seeing the girl hang off every word he had said so far, Naruto plunged on. However, by training in the use of your element, it is possible to cut back not only the number of hand seals a jutsu uses, but also the amount of chakra required for a jutsu. This comes from understanding the basics of how your element works, in this case how water flows, so to speak. Now to do this, I want you to use your chakra and create a whirlpool effect in the river. As soon as Naruto and Udon got out of sight from the other two genin, Naruto turned around to the runny-nosed preteen and began speaking. Before we begin, I want you to know that the lightning element is not only one of the most destructive, but also one of the most dangerous. While fire, if used incorrectly, can get you burned, and wind can get you cut, lightning, if not channeled properly, can quite literally fry your nervous system and organs. Udon paled slightly at the knowledge, but still looked determined to learn. Naruto nodded his approval before continuing. That being said, lightning is also, in my opinion, at least the second strongest offensive element. What's the first strongest, sensei? Gasped Udon. A wind, Naruto answered quickly. Wind, because of its almost pure offensive nature and versatility in combat, makes it the most powerful offensive nature manipulation type. This is because wind can be used to slice through all kinds of matter, without regards to how strong or durable something is, or be used for blunt force trauma. And while fire can beat wind due to their opposing natures, a skilled wind user can beat just about any other ninjutsu specialist out there. Naruto shook his head. Anyway, we're getting off topic. Now the thing about lightning is it is not just an offensive or even defensive element like fire and wind. There are many Raiten jutsus that are supplemental in nature. The best example I can give you, the Raiten no Yoroi, lightning armor, that is used by the Yondaime Reikage, which increases not only one's physical strength, but also increases speed and reflexes by speeding up the neural synapses, increasing their overall physical performance by a factor of 4. Naruto smirked as Udon had a look of awe on his face. There are many jutsu that can do things similar to this. However, all of these are more advanced than the other jutsu and require an innate understanding, if not total mastery, over lightning. Naruto used wind manipulation to cut some leaves off of the branches and handed them over to Udon. Taking one of them, the blonde twirled it in his finger. To start learning how to utilize this chakra, I want you to make these leaves crumple, much like you did when you channeled chakra into the paper. Giving an example, Naruto channeled some lightning chakra into the leaf in his hand, making the entire thing crumple, making it look similar to a candy wrapper. To do this, you will have to learn to channel enough lightning chakra to make static electricity. To do this, it's best to think about what happens when you rub a balloon on your head. For the first week, this was how Naruto would train the three genin. Every morning they would get up and do their physical workout, which Naruto had made harder by adding weights to them. Afterwards, he would have them spar against each other and himself, making sure to point out their flaws and correct them. Naruto also gave Moegi and Udon a different fighting style, or to be more accurate, helped them make their own style, since all they used was the academy style, or as Naruto called it, the cookie-cutter taijutsu style. Moegi's was a variation of what Naruto knew on the style Shizen used, which was a medical ninja style that relied on the usage of the chakra maisu, chakra scalpel, to cut tendons and muscles. Naruto had given Moegi the scroll for that jutsu, but rather than cut tendons and muscles, he made her go after tendons, muscles, and the 8 vital spots in the human body. With Udon, he had him mix the standard academy taijutsu with jujutsu, which relied on grappling and using an opponent's weight against them. Naruto also taught Udon how to use chakra strings, allowing him to apply the basic chakra control exercise to the taijutsu style. This way he could trip or tie up his opponents temporarily to give him an edge. Neither style was complete and would not likely be for years to come, but he was sure they could make it good enough within the next month to properly use them. Thankfully, Konohamaru used the Sarutobi or Saru monkey-style taijutsu, so all Naruto had to do with him was spar and help point out his flaws. After lunch, they would then work on individual exercises. For the first 2 hours, Naruto would have them work on their element, doing the exercises he had instructed. None of them had gotten even close to mastering them, though Konohamaru could produce smoke and slight burns on the leaf. But that was to be expected since this was Jonin-level training, and only Konohamaru used elemental jutsu. Afterwards he would then work on strategy, mainly by playing shogi and go with them. As well as chakra control, this was something Naruto had been pretty strict on. Technically they were capable of water walking, but Naruto believed that these exercises were not mastered, unless you could fight while using them. To help with this, Naruto would have them spar for at least 1 hour, either on a vertical surface or on the water, though the latter was much more tiring since it required them to constantly pump out chakra and increase or decrease the amount according to how the water reacted to their presence. This however led to a decent increase in their reserves. While it was nothing truly significant, they had managed to gain a 15% increase in their reserves. Naruto looked at the 3 genin as they entered the clearing. Walking up to him they gave a greeting of Ohoya-sensei before awaiting their instructions. "I'm pleased to say that you 3 have made remarkable progress so far," Naruto said, causing pleased smiles to spread across their faces. "Therefore I have decided to not only increase the weights, but also double our morning workouts." All throughout Konoha wails of despair could be heard for the rest of the day. Mei sighed in both frustration and relief at having finally finished the paperwork, which sometimes never seemed to end. And frustration at the sheer amount of paperwork she had to finish, something that made her begin to regret taking the Kage position. It was even worse since her Naruto was not here to give her those absolutely kami-like messages. Thinking of the blonde-haired man who had come into her life brought a smile to her face. Because of the Chunin exams they had not been able to see each other for a while. However, she had sent a team to participate, a team that she was sure would make it to the final rounds. Especially since they were trained by herself, Ao and Chojuro in the shinobi arts. If they pass, that means I'll be able to visit Konoha in order to watch the Chunin exams. Maybe I can even get there a bit early. Her thoughts were derailed when a knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she called out. The door opened to reveal Ao, who walked in and gave her a bow. "Mizukage-sama, we have just received word that all 3 of our genin who are participating in the Chunin exam passed the second test." Mei felt a grin spread across her face. Standing up, she walked towards the door. "Thank you for informing me. I would like you to inform the council of this and tell them I will be going to see how our genin fare." She had just made it to the door when Ao mumbled behind her. "I think you're really just going to visit Naruto-san. I swear back in my day when 2 people liked each other they would just get married and be done with it." Mei's hand halted on the door knob as she turned with one of her chillingly pleasant smiles, the ones she used when about to inflict great pain on someone. "Ao, shut up or I'll kill you." Ao's eyes widened at the threat and he realized he had said that out loud. He soon began trying to talk his way out of it, which as always only made the situation worse. The second week was nearing its end, and Naruto had once again upped the training of the 3 genin. Increasing their weights, physical routine, and the difficulty of the chakra control exercises, and had started to actually teach them jutsu for their elements. While they had not gotten close to even managing to do more than base manipulation of their element, he felt that they should have a few that could be used for the Chunin exams. They were only in the C rank, but even a C rank jutsu in the right hands could have devastating effects. Naruto smiled as he sat on his father's head, a place he had often come to when he wanted to be alone. Today was the day he had given his students to relax, since he knew full well that without resting their muscles would never repair themselves and grow stronger. He looked back down at what was in his hand, his smile growing ever so slightly. He had been searching through the desk his parents had used when creating their seals. He had been looking for the seal that his father had come up with as a replacement for the bird-caged seal. While searching, he had come across a small leather-bound book. At first he had thought it would be some kind of book with notes on sealing techniques. Opening it, he had found out that it was not a book on sealing or anything even remotely shinobi-related. Instead, what he had found was a journal, his father's journal to be precise. It seemed to date back from the time his father had first learned to write, which was obvious by the messy scrawl at the beginning of the journal. And went into the third great shinobi war that his old man had been a part of, telling of his experience as a sensei and his desire to create a jutsu to end the war. Unfortunately for Naruto, it seemed to stop after that, mainly because it was completely full. Also unfortunately, there was not much about his mother in this journal, only a little where his father talked about her beauty and a few experiences he had with her, like when she had been kidnapped by Kyumo ninja and left her hair as a trail that her father followed. The blonde clan had assumed that his father had another journal somewhere, however despite searching had not found it. This also brought up something he had hoped to find. Naturally he assumed that since his father had a journal, then his mother would have one as well. Naruto had searched the entire jutsu library for any trace of something like that, however his search had been in vain. He had not been able to find any trace of a journal or diary from his mother. He had not even managed to find the letter Jiraiya said she had left. This led to the assumption that it had most likely been in the actual house during the Kyuubi attack and had probably been destroyed. Naruto was snapped out of his reverie when he felt a spike in chakra, signaling the use of a Sushin near his location. Naruto turned his head just as a male Umbu in a Nico mask appeared. "Namikaze-san, Tsunade-sama has requested your presence," he said in the typical monotone voice of an Umbu. Naruto sighed as he stood up and stretched. "Very well, I'll head there right now." The Umbu nodded before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. Naruto followed suit, only using water instead as he went to find out what Tsunade wanted him for. Tsunade stared at the red-headed beauty with an incredulous expression, trying to comprehend just how this conversation took this peculiar turn. It had started out ordinarily enough. She and the woman who Tsunade knew was the Mizukage of Kiri had started off swapping the basic pleasantries that all foreign dignitaries do. Doing basic standard political maneuvering to find out what kind of person the other was, by talking about mundane everyday topics. Tsunade, despite having been surprised by her early arrival, had not allowed it to get to her as they spoke, and had in fact found the conversation mildly pleasant, especially since it allowed her a break from her paperwork. She was also pleased to know that there was another woman besides her who had become a Kage. It kind of made the busted blonde feel like she was setting a trend. However, the conversation had taken an awkward, at least for Tsunade, turn. Tell me." The blonde Hokage spoke slowly as she gave the woman a mild glare. "Why are you requesting to spend the upcoming exams at the estate of one of my more prominent clan heads?" Tsunade had already paid for the Mizukage stay in Konoha at one of the 5-star hotels they had, along with extra places for her 2 guards. Of course she had an idea that had formed in her head the moment the red-haired woman made this request, but was holding off her judgment until she was proven right. However, if Tsunade was right, then someone was going to have some serious hell to pay. Mei just gave the woman a smile as she carefully hid the hand that held her ring. She knew Naruto had not informed anybody about their relationship yet. So while it was big news in Kiri, it would not reach the other elemental nations, due to her country's terrain that isolated it from the rest of the world. "I think it would be best if perhaps we had someone fetch Naruto, that way we could give you a proper explanation." She could of course just tell Tsunade herself. Hell, she did not even need to mention she was going to sleep at the blonde's place and just gone over after being shown to her hotel. However, due to Naruto's influence, Mei had developed a small devious side. Well, the devious side had always been there, but it was normally reserved for her and Naruto's bedtime activities. Tsunade just sighed before lifting up her hand, making one of the Umbu who were hiding in the room shimmer into existence. "You go find me Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze." The Umbu bowed before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. About 10 minutes later, Naruto himself appeared within a swirl of water. "Yo-bachan, you wanted to see me?" "And not now, Gaki," Tsunade said as she pinched the bridge of her nose, trying to rid herself of the headache she had gained. "In case you haven't noticed, we have guests." Naruto would have responded, but was stopped when a pair of slender arms wrapped around his neck and an impressive bust pressed into his back. "You know, I'm disappointed that you did not even notice me in the room, Narukoi," Mei said as she whispered into Naruto's ear. "That's not only disappointing, but I feel rather hurt too." Before she could say any more, Naruto puffed out of existence, causing the red-haired beauty to stumble forward. A pair of arms wrapped around her waist before she could get far, pulling her into an embrace, an impressive set of muscled abs and pectorals. "I apologize, Mayheim. I assure you it was not my intention to disappoint. I was only hoping to surprise you." Mei grinned and repressed a shiver of pleasure as she spoke. "You must be getting rusty. I was feeling rather hurt that you would ignore me." "Oh well, then why don't you allow me to make it up to you," Naruto said before gently nibbling on her earlobe, causing the Mizukage to let out a soft moan. Tsunade, despite having figured that this was in fact one of the 4 women Naruto spoke of at his first council meeting, was for lack of a better word shocked. In fact, she was so shocked that she did not even stop the pair as they continued their rather blatant sexual banter. She had of course known that Naruto knew the Mizukage and that they were at least friends. The blonde's abilities to make friends with people he barely knew was unmatched, and given the outstanding report Mei had given her on Naruto's performance in the Kiri Civil War, it was obvious they had to at least be close. However, when Mei had appeared before her and rather bluntly asked her to point her to Naruto's estate, well, she had an inkling as to what it was about. However, like most things, hearing about it and seeing it were two different things. She quickly got her bearings, however, and coughed into her hand, "Naruto," she said, getting the pair's attention, though the blonde had yet to actually take his arms off the red head. "You have a lot of explaining to do. I suggest you start doing it." Hehehehe, Naruto gulped a bit, knowing that look Tsunade was giving. He had seen it on her often enough when Jiraiya pissed the woman off to know what it meant. "Yeah, well, I guess the first thing I should tell you is that she is one of the women I have fallen in love with and am already engaged to." Naruto stopped his explanation as he and everyone else turned towards the door, which had just slammed shut. Looking around, Naruto blinked as he noticed that Chojuro was missing, most likely the one who had just left. "Looks like I crushed any hope he had of being with you, huh?" Naruto asked. Mei just sighed as she closed her eyes. She had of course knew of Chojuro's crush on her. Hell, all of Kiri knew of it. The poor boy could not get within 2 feet of her without turning red, and whenever he spoke with her his stuttering would get 10 times worse. However, she also knew that he knew of her relationship with Naruto. It would be impossible for him not to when he had walked in on the two of them making out on her desk. She would have thought that he had gotten over it by now, but she guessed that he had probably held out hope that what she and Naruto had was just a fling. "Ayo, could you please find Chojuro and then the two of you can either explore or go to the hotel," Mei commanded in her soft yet firm voice. Ayo just bowed. "I at once, Mizukage-sama." With a shake of his head, the blue-haired man left to find his wayward partner. "Now," Tsunade said, "why don't you two explain to me just why you thought it was a good idea to keep this from me?" Naruto shook off the slight fear at her subtle or not-so-subtle threat. "Well, it's subtle for her since she did not threaten me with bodily harm." Shaking the thoughts off, Naruto released Mei from his arms. Walking over, he took a seat in one of the chairs and gestured for Mei to sit in the other. However, the beautiful redhead seemed to have other ideas, as she walked over and plopped herself right on Naruto's lap. Tsunade's eyebrow twitched violently, but she repressed the urge to threaten the two, and instead sighed as she gestured for them to begin. Naruto cleared his throat as he and Mei began their story, telling Tsunade how they met and found comfort in each other during the Kiri Civil War. Chojuro growled in frustration as he stomped around Konoha, unconsciously releasing his killing intent, making several civilians back away. He just could not understand it. How was it that that damn blonde managed to worm his way into his Mizukage's heart, when he and everyone else around her had not? Was it because of the blonde's confidence? The commanding aura he had? That flirty attitude that was similar to Mei's own? Or something else entirely? Chojuro was not sure, but he did not feel that boy deserved someone as beautiful and amazing as Mei. He had known Mei for far longer than that boy. He should be the one that was with her. He was so wrapped up in his anger and inner rant that he failed to notice the other person turning the corner until it was too late. Isaribi cursed as she ran through the streets of Konoha, using the many side alleys and back roads to get to the Hokage Tower. She had been requested to take a later shift at the Hokage Tower and was now running late, having been held up at her second job. Isaribi had been working 2 jobs for the past 2 weeks now, having been hired to work at the Ichiraka's ramen bar. Of course, she did not need the second job. The one at the Hokage Tower gave her enough money to live off of. However, there were other reasons for her wanting to get the job, like being closer to a certain blonde shinobi. She had found out early on during her time in Konoha that Naruto would often frequent the by now famous Ichiraka ramen stand. And so, hoping that she would be able to run into him at places other than the Hokage Tower, she had gotten herself a job there. However, while she got to see a lot more of Naruto, the young woman was unsure if he saw her, at least in the way she wanted him to. The young clan head was not rude, of course. Quite the contrary. If she was not busy taking orders, Naruto would talk with her, oftentimes staying even after he finished eating to continue a conversation. And yet he did not seem to notice the subtle hints and advances she gave him, or perhaps he chose not to notice. She was beginning to think it was the latter, since Naruto treated her the same way he did Ayam, like a sister. The thought made her sigh. Perhaps it would be better if she found someone else? She had gotten a few advances, but had not really thought about going out with anyone other than Naruto. Perhaps she should talk to him, at least ask him what he thought of her before going for one of the men who asked her on a date. While it would hurt if he did not have any romantic feelings, it's not like it would be the end of the world. She was so focused on her thoughts and running that she completely missed the other person as she turned the corner. Goof! Isaribi thumped against a hard body of solid mass and fell backwards. Her eyes were slightly closed as she waited to fall on the ground. She opened her eyes when instead of feeling herself hitting hard ground, she felt a pair of arms wrapping around her frame to prevent her from falling. Are you all right, miss? Isaribi opened her eyes and blushed in embarrassment as she found herself staring into a pair of black eyes. She quickly shook it off as she spoke, yes, I'm fine. When the man let go of her, she dusted herself off a bit before turning to her savior. The man was of an average height, maybe a few inches taller than her. With black eyes, blue hair and oddly sharp, almost shark-like teeth. Though he is kind of cute, she shook her head of the thought as she looked at him. I'm sorry for bumping into you. I wasn't really paying attention to where I was going. Chojuro merely waved her apology off. It's all right, I should have been more aware of my surroundings. Isaribi tilted her head to the side. So are you new to Konoha? Oh no, I'm not from Konoha, Chojuro replied as he pointed to his Haitia-8, which was located securely on his chest. I'm from Kiri. I'm here with the Mizukage as her bodyguard for the Chunin exams. I see. Isaribi looked at the ground for a moment before looking back up. Anyway, I'm sorry for bumping into you. I was on my way to my second job. Chojuro was about to wave her apology off again when Isaribi began speaking. I know. Why don't you allow me to make it up to you? Chojuro blinked in surprise and was about to tell her she really did not have to when Isaribi spoke up again. I know, how about after I get off work I'll give you a tour, she suggested. It's the least I can do for running into you. The young swordsman tried to tell her it was perfectly all right, but was once again interrupted. Oh no! I almost forgot I have to get to my job. Isaribi looked at him. So I'll meet you here at 5 p.m. and then take you on that tour, okay? She did not give him a chance to respond as she ran off. Chojuro blinked as he watched the girl run towards the place he just left, wondering what that was all about and if he should do what she suggested. In the end he decided, since she had pretty much told him she would be here, that it would be rude not to accept her invitation. And it's not like she wasn't cute, he blushed a bit at that thought. Maybe he should see if they could do something other than just a tour. After all, it's not like he was going to be getting with Mei now. I wonder if this could be considered a date. Naruto did not even bother holding in a grin as he watched Mei shovel his food into her mouth, eating as if she had not been fed in weeks. Enjoying the meal, are we? The blonde asked in an amused tone. Mei blushed as she realized what she was doing. She had been so overjoyed at getting to eat some of Naruto's food that she completely forgot her manners. This was almost as embarrassing as the first time he had cooked for her, which had pretty much been her doing the same thing. However, she had just missed his cooking so much that she had forgotten herself, and Naruto's cooking was far better than eating out like she did when he was not with her. It was only known to Naruto, but Mei could not cook. In fact, it would be accurate to say that she was downright awful at it. She had only tried to cook once. It had been the first time she had used the Hiraishin kunai to summon Naruto. Mei had wanted to show her appreciation for all he had done for her, and felt there was no better way to do that than cook him a good meal. She had remembered reading something about the best way to get to a man's heart was through his stomach, something she discovered while reading in one of the magazines she had on marriage. And so she had set about to try and make Naruto a good meal, the key word being tried. What she had managed to do instead was create a kitchen catastrophe of epic proportions. First, she had somehow managed to burn the water. How water could possibly burn was beyond her, but it had happened. Then she had started a fire in the oven. She had of course used a water jutsu to put it out, but the oven had been ruined. Finally, when she thought she had been getting the hang of things, she somehow managed to blow up her whole kitchen. The explosion had sent all of her shark umbu in Kiri rushing to her mansion, thinking it was some kind of terrorist or ninja attack. It had only been thanks to Naruto taking the blame for the cooking accident that she had been able to save face in front of her ninja forces. Of course, that had not stopped the utter humiliation that the disaster caused, since Naruto himself had lain witness to it. Of course, he had merely laughed at her, before telling her that he did not care if she could cook or not and that his feelings would never change. She had been so happy that she had proceeded to kiss him senseless. That night had also been the night they had made love for the first time, turning what had been one of her worst experiences to one of the best nights of her life. Shut up," she mumbled as she looked away from him, her face forming a pout. "It's not my fault your cooking is so damn good, no one else can make such incredible food," she admitted. Naruto's grin merely widened. "Well, that's good to know, and after all I wouldn't want someone taking away my job." Mei looked at him and quirked an eyebrow in amusement. "A job, huh?" Naruto grinned. "That's right, my job is to be Mei Taromi's perfect husband." Mei blushed as a smile slowly formed on her face. "And what does this job entail other than making amazing food?" Naruto merely smiled as he stood up and walked towards her. A puff of smoke signaled the creation of 2 Kagebushins as Naruto grabbed Mei's hand, while the clones took their plates away and washed them in the sink. Naruto led Mei over to the couch. Sitting down, the blonde pulled Mei with him and situated her in between his legs. His hands soon began to gently massage her shoulders, getting a soft moan from the redhead as she felt the tension in her muscles start to leave her. Naruto leaned his head down and planted a kiss on her neck. "Rather than tell you that, why don't I show you?" Naruto whispered against her neck. Mei shivered as the blonde's hot breath hit her neck, before letting out a small gasp as Naruto nibbled on her neck. "That would be nice," Mei said as she tilted her head to let Naruto have better access to her tender flesh. Naruto grinned, and while his mouth lavished attention on her slender neck, his hands traveled down to her lower back and began to massage there. Mei's moans and whimpers began to increase in volume, so much so that she did not hear the telltale poof of a Kagebushin being formed. It was only when she felt 2 extra set of hands on her body, particularly her breasts, that she opened her eyes and found herself staring at another Naruto. However, her eyes closed a second later and her back arched, as the blonde in front of her began to gently massage and knead her breasts through the fabric of her dress. The clone Naruto leaned in and captured the woman's lips, nibbling on her lower lip until he was granted access to her mouth. Mei grinned into the kiss as her hands trailed up to the zipper on the front of her dress, unzipping her garments so that the 2 Narutos could take it off. She knew that they were not getting any sleep tonight. 98, 99, 100. Was sitting behind his desk doing what he always did when he was on the job, neglecting his paperwork to focus on his training. Something that was a common occurrence since he had taken the Raikage title. He was just about to start doing reps with his other hand when a knock at the door interrupted him. "They enter," the Raikage called out as he dropped his weight to the floor with a smash. The door opened to reveal one of his messenger ninja with a scroll in hand. The ninja walked up and bowed before presenting him the scroll. Grabbed the scroll and unfurled it before reading its contents. As he did, a grin crept onto his face. Apparently 3 of his shinobi had made it to the finals. This would be the perfect opportunity to check out the caliber of the other nation's shinobi. As he thought of that, another thought entered his mind, one that made his smile widen even more. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze had been reported to have arrived at Konoha about 1 or 2 months ago and had taken up his clan name. No doubt Yujito would love to see the young man again. He looked up at the messenger before speaking. "Get me B and Yujito," said as he stood up. They were heading to Konoha. Mei had a large and content smile on her face as she and Naruto walked through the streets of Konoha. After a hearty breakfast, Naruto had decided to take Mei out on a tour, showing her the many sights the village had to offer. She had to smile at the different places he had taken her. Each one seemed to have a rather funny story to it. Most of the places he had shown her revolved around one of the many pranks he had pulled when he was a child. Her favorite story had been when he had taken her through the clan district of Konoha and shown her the Hyuga estate. He had given her the story of how he had snuck into the estate during the night, and he had managed to dye all of their underwear a bright pink color and hang them up around the village. She dutifully ignored the stares of jealousy and envy she was receiving from the various females they had passed. Mei figured that Naruto would be popular given his good looks and clan status, so while it was annoying, she could deal with it. She also had to admit that it was rather amusing that these girls thought they had a chance with Naruto. Mei could proudly claim that she was one of the few people who truly knew the young blonde clan head, so she knew that he would never consider getting with some fangirl. As the two walked around, Mei took Naruto to several clothing stores, trying on different outfits to tease her blonde fiancé with. She even went so far as to come out wearing nothing but a bikini, though that ended up causing a bit of a problem when Naruto smashed his fist into the face of a man who had given Mei a catcall. Other than that, they merely walked around discussing various topics that interested them. They made sure to avoid anything even remotely ninja or Kage related. Eventually Naruto stopped them when the two found themselves standing in front of the Ichiraku's ramen bar. The place had gotten a lot more crowded than it used to be. A combination of Naruto's newfound fame and the Ichiraku's new menu managed to give the place new life. After the blonde had returned from his training trip and visited the ramen stand for the first time, he had suggested that they expand their menu to make more than just ramen. Naruto had even given the stand owner and his daughter a few recipes from his mother's cookbooks. Now the place had become so popular that they had actually needed to make an outdoor area for guests to eat there, as well as hire more help to keep them from being overwhelmed. "Come on, Mei-chan," Naruto said as he gently tugged on her hand and entered the stand. When he did, many of the people eating there stopped and stared, something that had been happening quite often nowadays and never ceased to both amuse and annoy the blonde shinobi. Several of the men there were giving Mei looks of lust and looked like they might start giving her catcalls. However, Naruto turned an icy glare on them, causing whatever they were going to say to die in their throats. Once the people there began to start conversation again, Naruto made his way to the front of the stand. As always, the seat that was specifically reserved for him was open. Naruto smiled as he sat down and pulled Mei with him. As he secured his arms around the red head, Naruto looked over at Tuchi, who was cooking some food over a stove. "Agoy! Tuchi-ajisen, how about some ramen for your favorite customer?" Old man Tuchi turned around when he heard the familiar voice. Naruto-kun, it's good to." He trailed off as he saw the beautiful woman sitting in the blonde's lap. A sly grin crossed the old man's face as he looked at the two. "Who is this lovely young lady you're with, Naruto? Your girlfriend?" Naruto grinned at the man who had been one of the few people to ever treat him like a human being when he was younger. "Close, Ajisen, very close." Naruto cleared his throat as he introduced the two to each other. "Mei-chan, this is Tuchi Ajisen, owner of the best ramen stand in the entire Elemental Nations. Ajisen, this is Mei Terumi, one of my most precious people and someone I hope to spend the rest of my life with." While Mei blushed at the rather bold proclamation, Tuchi just blinked for a moment as he looked the two over. As he did, he noticed the two's interlocked hands, or more specifically the ring on Mei's left hand. The old man chuckled for a bit before speaking. "So what kind of ramen can I get you and your lady friend?" Naruto grinned. "Start me off with 3 bowls of miso and we'll make our way from there." And I'll have some shrimp ramen with a side of dorayaki." "One," Mei said as she looked over the menu. While ramen was not her favorite food, she had to admit that it was good on occasion, and if Naruto's bragging was anything to go by, the ramen would be even better here. Tuchi nodded as he turned his head to the back. "Oi, I am. Why don't you help me make some miso for our favorite customer?" Hang on." I am called out as she came out of the back with a box of supplies, blocking her view of Naruto. Grunting with exertion, she put the box down and turned to Naruto with a smile. "So 3 miso? Amen." She trailed off as she noticed that Naruto was not alone, and was in fact cuddled up to a woman with red hair, and if I were honest with herself, she would admit to being jealous of the woman's beauty. For a second felt an intense surge of jealousy. While the young man had always been a younger brother to her, his recent change had made it hard to see him as such. She knew he saw her as a sister, as evidenced by the way he still called her Nei-chan. She tried to respond in kind, but it was still hard seeing him with another woman. Who is this?" I asked with slightly narrowed eyes. Despite seeing the narrowing of the younger woman's eyes, Mei merely smiled, knowing she was just being protective of Naruto. Naruto, in an effort to defuse the situation, decided to introduce the two of them. "I am Nei-chan, this is Mei Terumi, one of my most precious people." "Mei-chan, this is I am Nei-chan." Mei untangled one of her hands from Naruto's and offered it to the brown-haired ramen waitress. It's a pleasure to meet you. I am San. Naruto has often talked about you whenever he visits me. I am blinked as her mind registered the affectionate suffix the woman used. Looking at Mei's hand, she slowly took it, deciding to treat her nicely, if for no other reason than Naruto would want her to. It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Mei-san. I take it you're not from around here? I am asked, trying to be pleasant as she started to make their ramen. That's right, Mei said as she raised her voice a bit so I could hear her despite the new distance. I'm actually from Kiri. I came here because we have an entire team that passed this year, and I felt I could use it as an excuse to see Naruto. So how did you two meet? I am asked as she brought them their first bowl. Naruto and Mei smiled as they began to retell the story of how they met, leaving out a few details that they did not want getting out to the public yet. The two stayed there for a while as they continued to speak with the ramen waitress whenever she was not taking other orders. After 3 bowls for Mei and 23 bowls for Naruto, the two headed out and continued their walk around Konoha. As the two walked arm in arm around the village, Naruto noticed that the sun was starting to set. Hey Mei-chan, why don't we go back home and I'll cook you some dinner, Naruto said. Mei nodded as she leaned her head on his shoulder while they walked. That sounds good, Koi. Where are you taking me, Naruto? Mei asked as he led her up a hill. Not that she could actually see that, since Naruto had blindfolded her. They had just gotten finished having dinner a little while ago, and Naruto had said he wanted to show her something. Of course, he also said it was a surprise, hence the blindfold. All she knew for certain was that they were walking up a hill. If I told you it would ruin the surprise, Mei-chan, Naruto said in a slightly teasing voice. Just be patient, I guarantee you'll love what I have to show you. Mei gave a pout as she lifted her hand to the blindfold, only for Naruto's hands to grab hers. Mei-chan, come on now, you don't want to ruin the surprise, do you? Mei sighed as she decided to relent as she was led to wherever Naruto was taking her. They continued making their way up the slope, Naruto behind Mei and gently pushing her forward. The woman stumbled a few times since she could not see where she was going. Thankfully, Naruto was right behind her and made sure she would not fall to the ground. Eventually, Mei began to hear the sound of running water, piquing her curiosity and making her wish she had her hands free so she could take her blindfold off. As the sound of running water became clearer, they stopped. Naruto reached up and undid the Mei's blindfold. When the blindfold was removed, Mei found herself gasping at the scene before her. They standing in a small clearing that had a slope to it, yet somehow it was still able to maintain the water from the small lake in the middle. Said lake was where the noise was coming from. To the pair's right was a decent-sized waterfall. The water of the lake was a crystal clear blue. It was so clear that Mei could actually see the bottom even out in the middle from where she was standing. All around the lake were various forms of flora and fauna, decorating the entire area in different colors. Many of the flowers she did not recognize, but that only made the clearing that much more breathtaking. It's beautiful, Mei breathed out in awe at the sight. Thank you, Naruto said from behind her. It took me a while to build. I actually had to have someone I know help me grow the plants faster. He had found out through various means that the Umbu with the Nico mask was named Tenzo, and had found out through accident that he somehow had the ability to use Mokuton Jutsu. The blonde had managed to get the man's help when he had been assigned guard duty for Tsunade, and had overheard Naruto discussing his idea to make this place. And so Tenzo had helped him create the trees, the lake and the waterfall. Naruto had planted the flowers and plants he wanted to have there. Afterwards, he had used a large seal to cast a powerful genjutsu over the entire field, so that only he or the few people he wanted to let in here could even see it. You made this? Mei asked in shock. She knew that one of Naruto's hobbies was gardening, but she did not think he would ever take it this far. Naruto nodded as he walked a little ways in front of her. Well, not all of it, I had some help. Naruto then proceeded to take off his shirt, tossing it to the side before making to remove the other articles of clothing he had on. Naruto looked back over at Mei, who was staring at him, or to be more precise, drooling over his form. Naruto grinned. I know you like staring at me, but you should probably start taking off your own clothes if you want to go for a swim with me. Mei blinked a few times as his words registered. As they did, she gave Naruto a grin. I would love to get these infernal clothes off, but the zipper's in the back and I can't reach it. She gave Naruto a pouty expression. Perhaps you could help take it off me. Naruto chuckled as he stood up in nothing but his boxers, walking behind the beautiful red head. Grabbing her zipper, Naruto moved it down, loosening the dress she was in. Naruto placed a hand on her shoulder afterwards and began to slide the dress off of her. His hands caressed her sides as her dress fell to the floor, pooling at her feet. Naruto whistled as he stared at Mei, who was now surprisingly completely nude. "Now how did I miss that?" the blonde asked rhetorically. Mei turned her head to give him a sultry smile. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Now she turned around to face him. Grabbing the hem of his boxers, the woman's smile increased. "This won't do at all." With that she slid his boxers off of him, moving back up and allowing her hands to ghost over him, before she wrapped her arms around his neck and gave him a kiss, pressing her body against his and sensually rubbing her breasts up and down his chest. Both of them moaned as they felt each other's skin rub against them, sending small jolts of pleasure through them. Mei broke away and grabbed his hand, before leading him towards the water. "Now I believe you said something about swimming." Yujito tried not to pay attention to B as he began to rap to the guards he had given their passports to, which she would have normally kicked him for. Instead, the blonde Kumo Kunoichi was looking out over the village they were at. Konoha was vastly different than what she had been expecting. All of the buildings were made out of a mixture of wood and brick. They were square and fairly standard looking. All around the village were trees, a lot of trees in various shapes and sizes. While she had seen villages that were very similar to Konoha, it was still something she had not expected, given that this was a ninja village. The atmosphere was also very different than what one would expect from a ninja village. The place had a very peaceful air to it. There was none of the paranoia and militaristic feel that her own village produced. As the three made their way into the village, she also noticed the difference in the population. In Kumo, more than 90% of the population was made out of ninja, with the other 10% being civilians such as merchants and the like. Here it looked like more than 50% were civilians, which became quite obvious from the way they were blatantly gawking at them as they passed. However, she knew that this did not mean that Konoha was in any way weak. Some of the best shinobi in the world were produced here, including Naruto, who was one of the most powerful shinobi she knew. Yujito turned her head as she sensed that they already had a tail trailing them. If not for her enhanced senses, there would be no way she would have found them. She shook her head and decided to ignore the ninja trailing them. They did not give off any intent to harm, so they were most likely just watching them to make sure they did not cause trouble. Likewise, she ignored the gaping civilians. They were probably not used to seeing Kumo shinobi, much less the raikage in their village. They walked over to the large red tower in the middle with the kanji 4 fire over the door, obviously the Hokage tower. Walking inside, they took a set of stairs to the 3rd floor, where they spotted a black-haired female looking through some files on her desk. The three went up to the girl and tapped on the desk. "Excuse me." The girl looked up and felt her eyes widen as she recognized the Kage robes A was wearing. "I am the raikage of Kumo. With me are my bodyguards Yujito ni and Karabi. Yo, young one, I'm the master when it comes to fun. I float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. That's because I'm the killer bee," began his introduction, only to be interrupted when he was kicked in the face by Yujito. Before the Catwoman could begin yelling, turned to the girl and spoke. "I believe the Hokage is expecting us." Isaribi nodded as she walked over to the door that led to the Hokage's office. She knocked on it a few times before opening it and sticking her head in. "Hokage-sama, Raikage Dano and his escorts are here," she informed the busted blonde, who was for once actually doing her work. Tsunade looked up. "Very well, send them in." Isaribi nodded before opening the door for the 3 Kumo ninja to enter. As they did, Tsunade stood up and walked over to them in greeting. "Raikage Dano, it is a pleasure to see you here." She stuck out her hand, which the Raikage took. "I trust your trip went well?" Tsunade asked as she went through the customary pleasantries. "I as well as could be expected," Ye replied. "Unfortunately, I was not able to find the time to lift my weights, but some sacrifices must be made." Tsunade blinked for a moment and was glad that she had received a report from Jiraiya about the man's eccentric and very guy-like attitude towards training. "That is good to hear," Tsunade said as she went back to her seat. "You are a week earlier than expected. Thankfully, we have already reserved your hotel rooms for you." The Raikage scratched the back of his head. "Yes, well, we were also hoping to see Naruto-san sometime before the tournament began." That's right. That's right. B said in an enthusiastic voice. Our kitty here was hoping that her blonde fox was near. Tsunade blinked at the odd and rather terrible wrapping. She opened her mouth to say something when B's head was suddenly implanted in her wall. Damn it, B! Yujito yelled, an angry and embarrassed blush on her face. Why can't you ever stop rapping? This entire journey, that's all you've done. And worse, adding me into them. B merely pulled his head out of the wall. Now come on, kitten, you know you shouldn't be hittin'. Tsunade's brow twitched as she watched the duo. A part of her was impressed at her fellow blonde's strength. However, another part was rather upset that she would need to get her wall repaired. Deciding to intervene before the blonde Kumo Kunoichi did that again, she spoke up. Excuse me. The three turned their attention to her. What did you mean when you said, well, whatever it was you just said? Tsunade asked, since she was not quite sure what to call his bad rap. Before B could rap again, A spoke up. What he meant was that our little Yujito here, the Reikage pointed to a now embarrassed Yujito. It has a, how shall we put this, a very close relationship to Naruto-san, so we came early to allow her to spend time with him. Tsunade scrutinized the young blonde before her, making the Nibi Jinchuriki blush and squirm under the older woman's gaze. Finally, Tsunade looked at the blonde Kumo Kunoichi's hands. Sure enough, proudly displayed on her right ring finger was a ring. One that looked very similar to the one another woman who had come in a few days ago wore. That little brat! Tsunade mentally ground out. Finding out that Naruto was engaged to the Mizukage was shocking enough. Now Naruto, she finds out he's also engaged to a Kumo Kunoichi and a known Jinchuriki no less. What was next to daimyo? In the middle of a council meeting in Haru no Kuni, Koyuki gave a loud sneeze. It seems someone is talking about you, daimyo-sama, one of the delegates said. Koyuki wiped her nose with a tissue her aide gave her. Seems so. I hope it's Naruto. Before her mental rant could go any further, another thought came to mind. I suppose you would like to know where Naruto lives, right, Yujito-san? Asked Tsunade with a smirk. This will show him what happens when he does not tell me such important information. Yujito blushed a bright red. Yes. Tsunade nodded as she grabbed a scroll and wrote down the instructions, giving them to the girl, who thanked her before running out of the door. This will be his punishment, thought the busted blonde Hokage as she turned to the Reikage and began their conversation again. Mei sighed as she sat on one of the couches in the living room. It had only been a few hours, but she was already missing Naruto. The blonde shinobi had gone out to train Konohamaru and his team, having felt that he was neglecting them by sending Kage Bushins every day since Mei had gotten here. She knew that she was feeling spoiled by being here, getting to see him every morning, getting kissed awake every morning, among other things. She grinned as she thought of all the enjoyable times they had had this week, and there's even more enjoyable times on the way. She looked over at the clock and saw that it was nearing 5 o'clock, meaning Naruto would be getting back soon for their date tonight. That brought up a thought. She still needed to get dressed. Of course, she already knew what she was going to wear. She had Naruto unknowingly buy it for her during their first day together in Konoha. Still, it would take a while to put on, so she best get started now. She stood up and was about to go upstairs when the bell for the gate rang. Mei grunted in both annoyance and curiosity. Moving towards the door, she wondered who could be coming over since no one had ever bothered to come here before. The beautiful redhead walked outside and up to the gate, placing her hands on the two small circles and channeling her chakra like Naruto told her to. The seals that Naruto had placed all over the gate soon began to retract, curling in on themselves as they moved towards the circles. When they stopped, there was a click signaling the gate was unlocked. Mei opened it and was about to tell whoever it was that Naruto was not here, only to stop when she spotted a woman she had met only once before. Yujito-san. Naruto entered the gate to his house after his training session with Konohamaru, Moegi and Udon. The blonde was quite pleased with their progress. They had advanced far within the past 3 weeks. Naruto could honestly say that any one of the three could take on the average Chunin and win, though they still had a long way to go to defeat higher-ranked ninja. Still, he was sure that if given time they would get there. He was also sure that they would become Chunin after these exams were over. Unlocking the door to his house, Naruto walked in, looking around as he shut the door. He frowned when he did not see Mei. For the past week that she had been living with him, the woman had always greeted him at the door. Maybe she's just getting ready for our date. Naruto thought to himself as he walked farther in the house. He shrugged the thought off as he walked upstairs to his room to get ready for their date. Mei was a Kage-level ninja, so he knew that she was not in any danger. However, before he could get too far along the stairs, a noise behind him made the blonde stop, or rather two voices made him stop. Hello Narukoi/Naruto-kun. Naruto turned around in surprise. His eyes soon found a familiar face he had not expected to see so soon. Yugi-chan. Naruto repressed the small shiver of fear that ran up his spine. He looked at the two women, both of whom were attached to one of his arms. Naruto had decided that rather than just him and Mei going on the date, it would be him, Mei and Yujito who had shown up just today apparently. Of course he had been forced to change the reservations to 3 instead of 2, but that would not be too much of a problem. The only issue would be the increased cost, and Naruto was rich enough that it would not even put a dent in his account. Though even if it did, he would have still taken them out anyway. However, there was a slight problem that Naruto noticed, and that was the tension he felt between the two women he was with. They were not at each other's throats or anything, but he did notice a definite rift between them. That they had also taken to throwing the occasional glare only served to confirm this. The blonde male was not blind to this, nor to the reasons behind it. Unlike most men, Naruto could proudly say that while he did not know exactly how females thought, he was probably the closest living male to have an inkling of their thought process. This was due to Naruto's use of the Orochi no Jutsu that he had made when he was a kid, which had been used on several missions he had undertaken with Jiraiya during his training trip. There had been several slave trade rings that he and his perverted sensei had broken up. Say what you will about the Toad Sennin's perverseness, but the man did respect women, in his own way of course. This had been used as a part of Naruto's training. It had been his job to infiltrate their base of operations somehow. Naruto had decided to use the Orochi no Jutsu to disguise himself as a female. After that he had gotten captured by the bandits who would then take him to be processed before being sold on the black market. His time as a female had given Naruto a look into a female's mindset, allowing him to understand the fairer sex better than most. Naruto knew that he was the main reason for the tension Mei and Yujito felt between each other. There was not really anything else that could cause it. Both of them were extremely strong females, which meant that they were unused to having to share things. It made worse that Yujito had never been in love before this, so she did not really know how to handle it. While Mei was a Kage with a flirtatious attitude and a strong desire to get married, she was used to being the center of attention and not just his. So having someone who he loved as much as her with them, and who could compete with her in beauty, was a possible recipe for disaster. Naruto looked at the two of them again. They had both taken the time to dress up in clothes that showed off just how beautiful the two were. Like always, Mei was in a blue dress, however this one differed from the one she usually wore. The dress was strapless and had a low V-cut in the back, showing off her slender yet toned shoulders and back. They front seemed a little tight and pushed up her already rather ample bosom, and Naruto could tell she was not wearing a bra. The dress stopped halfway above the knees, allowing Naruto to see her mile-long legs. She also had her hair done up in a traditional Japanese bun. Even the 4 bangs were out of her eyes, allowing Naruto to see both of her emerald green eyes. There were a few strands of hair that had gotten loose and framed her face, however that only added to her beauty as far as Naruto was concerned. Yujito was also dressed up nicely, having taken to wearing the same dress she had on for their first date, bringing a smile to Naruto's face at the fond memory. Her hair was also done up today, rather than let down like she usually had it when they went on their dates. The blonde woman was also wearing makeup, red lipstick and purple eyeliner with a hint of blush. Naruto knew that Yujito only knew the basics of how to put on makeup. Hell, even Naruto knew more about makeup than she did. Naruto could easily recognize her makeup as the handiwork of Mei. In an effort to get them stop throwing each other glares and condescending looks, Naruto disengaged them from his arms before wrapping an arm around the two's waists. "You two look beautiful," Naruto complimented, as he pulled them close enough so that their heads were leaning on one of his shoulders. Both girls blushed at hearing the compliment, only to notice the other was blushing and ended up glaring at each other again. Unfortunately for Naruto, he had not noticed the glare, though he could feel the increased tension. Thankfully they arrived at the restaurant without any incident. The three entered the rather opulent entrance to the restaurant, a new one that had opened up just last year called Bukamono's. As they entered, Naruto had to hold in a whistle. This place could easily be mistaken for some kind of palace. Grand columns and tapestries with the Konoha leaf symbol and Hino Kuni national flower on them were strung up on the walls. The center of the room was empty at the moment, and rather than soft carpet, the floor was made of varnished wood. There was a light music being played by a band on a stage on one side of the room. Naruto was able to deduce from this that center floor was for dancing. Along the walls and large and comfortable-looking booths, with deep red-colored cushioning and curved in a quarter circle. Located throughout the restaurant were large aquariums filled with different species of fish, each one filled with species from a different region of the elementals. Naruto walked up to the front desk where a waitress was standing. Tapping it on the desk, he got the young woman's attention. Said waitress looked up and blushed at seeing the by now very well-known handsome blonde. "How can I help you, Namikaze-sama?" she asked before noticing the two women on his arm and glared. Naruto kept himself from sighing as he spoke. "I believe that I have a reservation here for 3, it would be under Uzumaki Namikaze." The young waitress stopped glaring at Mei and Yujido, looking down as she leafed through the reservations book. "Let's see, Here it is." The woman grabbed 3 menus before gesturing for them to follow her. Naruto tightened his hold around Mei and Yujido's waists as he followed the waitress, stopping at the table they were granted. Naruto slid in as Mei and Yujido each got on one side of him, making sure that they were as close as possible without being uncomfortable in the booth. "Now here are your menus, your waiter will be here shortly, so if there is anything you need, do not be afraid to ask him." With that, the young woman gave Naruto's 2 dates one last glare, before walking back to the front desk. As they sat, Naruto decided to talk in order to dispel the still growing tension between the two women. "So Yugi-chan, how have A and B been doing?" Yujido looked up at him and smiled. "They're doing well. A is the same as always, though he has been complaining more recently, something about not getting any challenging fights." Naruto chuckled at hearing that, but did not say anything as Yujido continued. "As for Karabi, well, he's Karabi. He's still doing his terrible raps, and is still getting on my nerves." Well, it's good to hear that some things never change," Naruto said with a smile, making the blonde woman smile as well. "So you're close to the Raikage, Yujito-san?" asked Mei as she tried to get the conversation towards her. Yujito nodded. "Yes, they may be annoying and eccentric, but they have always been the closest thing I've ever had to family." "That must be nice being so close to the Raikage like that," Mei commented. "I hear he is quite powerful." Naruto could instantly see where this was going and made to stop it before any argument could break out. "He is fairly powerful, and I would often spar with him when I was in Kumo, so I can tell you firsthand that if I was not a Jinchuriki, he would kick my ass 6 ways to Sunday. By the way, how has Kiri been? I hear you made a trade agreement with Nami recently?" Mei gave the blonde shinobi a grin. "We have, thanks to you." Her grin turned somewhat seductive as she leaned into him. "All it took was your recommendation, and they were practically walking over themselves to give us a trade agreement." "That's great," Naruto said in an enthusiastic voice as he continued conversing with the two. As the conversation continued, Naruto found out very quickly that he could not stay on any one topic for too long. If he did, then either Mei or Yujito would attempt to make a subtly scathing comment about the other, thus Naruto would change topics whenever one of them began to look like they would make a condescending remark. The waiter came a little while later. After the 3 had ordered their food, Naruto decided it may be a good idea to excuse himself for a moment. With how territorial he guessed was an appropriate word, with how territorial the two were acting, the blonde figured it would be best if he were removed from the equation for a while. Hopefully it would give them some time to talk to each other more civilly. As Naruto walked off, Mei turned to Yujido and offered the Nibi Jinchuriki a small smirk. "I heard from Narukoi that you are quite the powerful kunoichi." Yujido smirked as well. If this woman wanted to talk ninja, she could do that with the best of them. I am, in Kumo I am considered the 2nd strongest jonin." Mei smiled as if she had won a victory. "That is most impressive, being such a powerful jonin," Mei finished as she placed an emphasis on jonin, letting the blonde woman know who had the higher status. Yujido frowned as she spoke. "It is nice, I suppose. I get to travel and see new sights." Yujido's frown turned into a small smirk as she continued, "Plus I don't have to deal with any paperwork other than the standard mission papers." Mei pursed her lips before smiling. That does sound nice. Though paperwork is not as bad as many people make it up to be, especially when you have someone like Naruto giving you a message while you work. Yujito's mouth turned into a thin line. He does give amazing messages, especially the full-body messages he usually gives me when we go to the hot springs. Mei narrowed her eyes a bit at that, however she soon gave Yujito a grin. When Naruto and I go to the hot springs we prefer to do other activities. Yujito could not hold her glare in this time. Yes, well, some of us have enough decency not to be so blatant about our sex life in public. Don't try to act like you're better than me with this, Mei said as she narrowed her eyes at Yujito. I think you know that you are no better than me. And at least I am not afraid to admit it. Yujito hissed at the girl and the two soon began to trade more and more insults, with each one becoming more vicious and degrading than the last. The waiter who had come with their food left rather quickly after setting it down in order to avoid the increasing killing intent coming from the two. Eventually their argument came to where the two were actually about to trade blows. Mei ended up slapping the blonde Kumo Kunoichi. In retaliation, Yujito hit Mei hard enough to knock her onto the table. Unfortunately for them, Mei also ended up creating enough kinetic force to send their food flying. The two stopped fighting as they watched their food fly into the air, before landing right on top of the whole reason for their argument. Naruto sighed as he got out of the bathroom, hoping that the two had been able to solve their problem. He walked over towards where they were sitting and blinked in surprise when he saw Mei getting punched in the face. Because of his surprise, Naruto was unable to notice the food that had been sent sailing, food which landed right on top of him. Soon the blonde shinobi found himself covered in noodles, sushi, rice, chicken and some kind of garlic-smelling broth. Without really thinking, Naruto took off his jacket and wiped away what he could of the food and sauce, while walking over to the two now ashamed-looking women. Naruto did not pay any attention to their expressions, or those of the other customers who were whispering. Gently grabbing the two girls by the hand, he led them to the front desk, where he paid for the meal and left. During the walk home, Naruto had still not spoken as his mind tried to process what happened. He could not understand how the two could actually lose their cool like that, becoming angry enough at each other that they would actually start to fight. Both Mei and Yujito had always been able to keep their emotions under control. They would not be such amazing kunoichi if they couldn't. His body stayed on autopilot as the three entered the gate to Naruto's house. Opening the door, Naruto let the two girls in first. He led the two over to one of the couches and sat them down in one, while he took another. For a moment he just looked at them, making the two bow their heads as they began to feel like a child who had been caught doing something they should not. Finally Naruto decided to speak. So, what exactly happened back there? I mean, it's not like you two to lose your cool over something unless it was serious. Both Mei and Yujito looked up as they began to corroborate their story, occasionally trying to interrupt each other and almost getting into another fight. However, Naruto made sure to break it up before anything could happen. Eventually Naruto began to get an idea of what happened. A part of him had been afraid this would have happened. After all, if he had to share either of them with another man, you can be sure he would not stand for it. A part of him had hoped they would not fight, and that they would at least remain civil until they got to really know each other. Still, he could not blame them for it. After all, it was his fault they were fighting over something like this. It had always been on his mind when he had first been told he would need to marry multiple women by Jiraiya due to his clan. How would they feel about being forced to share him with not just one, but 3 other women? It was something that he had continuously felt bad about, making him feel like he was denying them a chance to find someone who would be able to spend all of their time with just them. Naruto sighed as he closed his eyes. I'm sorry, you two. The 2 women looked at him in surprise. However, Naruto did not see their expressions as she spoke. This is my fault. I doubt you 2 would have fought if it were not for having to share me. I'm sorry I am not able to give you girls what you deserve, someone who can spend all their time with you and treat you right. The girls felt their jaws hang open as Naruto spoke. How could he even say that? He had always taken time out of his schedule to visit them, despite it getting even fuller due to his clan status being active and all the council meetings he's had to go to. Naruto stood up, bringing their attention to him. I'm going to go take shower, Naruto said in response to their looks. Perhaps you girls could talk, maybe see if this being with me is what you really want. With that, Naruto left, walking upstairs to take a shower. Both girls put their heads back down as they cursed themselves for getting into a foolish argument. Both knew what happened to clans, especially ones that had Kekei Genkai. Due to the war in Kiri, Mei had been forced to order 6 bloodline clans that were on the verge of extinction because of the war Kiri had gotten out of to practice polygamy. In fact, due to her bloodline, she would be forced to produce a male heir who could take multiple wives as well. So she knew this would happen. She had told Naruto that she was okay with it. Yet she had still gotten in a fight with one of the other women he was going to marry. Likewise, Yujito knew of at least 3 bloodline clans in Kyumo that had been placed under the clan breeding program. Hell, they had been going to use the kidnapped Hyuga heiress for breeding, had the kidnappers not been caught. Yet even knowing this, she had still been rude to Mei, who, if she were honest with herself, she respected a great deal. The two looked at each other. "I'm sorry/I apologize," they both blinked as they spoke at the same time. Mei gestured for Yujito to go first. "I'm sorry," Yujito said, "I did not mean to say any of those things to you. None of them were true. In truth, I actually respect you for being able to make Kage." Mei smiled. "I would like to apologize as well. I did not mean say anything that would hurt you, especially with insults that were false." So, Yujito squirmed a bit, feeling unsure how to proceed. Mei decided to help her and stuck her hand out. "Friends?" Yujito smiled and gave a nod as she took Mei's hand. "Thanks," Yujito said. She looked over at the stairs and sighed. "We really messed up, huh?" "Yeah, we did," Mei said as she too turned her eyes to the stairs. She thought for a moment before a smile crept onto her face. "However, I know of a way we can make it up to Narukoi." The readhead began to explain her plan to Yujito. The next day, Naruto had a large smile on his face as he and Yujito walked down the street, dutifully ignoring the stares they received. They had been receiving them all day. Naruto was unsure whether it was from them seeing him with someone other than Mei, whom he had been seen around Konoha with for the past week, or whether it was the ridiculously large smile he was sporting. Of course, he felt he had a damn good reason to smile. This morning he had woken up to not just Mei but also Yujito. Both of them had been flushed up against him, cuddled onto his chest. It was the first time he had ever slept with more than one of the important women in his life. He had to admit that it felt good. After he had given them both a wake-up to remember, they had all taken a shower together, having a little fun there before getting clean. The three had then had a large breakfast of pancakes, bacon, eggs, hash browns and orange juice, which had been prepared by a Naruto clone. Afterwards, Mei had left, saying something about it probably being a good idea if she actually met the genin team she had sent, which she had not done the entire time she had been in Konoha. This had given Naruto and Yujito the entire day to themselves. And so they had planned out the day. Naruto had first taken Yujito on a tour, similar to the one had given Mei. Around noon, Naruto and Yujito had made their way to the ramen bar, although that had not been as good an idea as he had thought at first. When Ayame saw Naruto walking in with another woman besides Mei, she had been pissed. It was the first time the blonde shinobi had ever seen his Nei-chan so angry at him. She had ranted his ear off about being faithful for nearly 15 minutes. It was really only thanks to Yujito that he had gotten off easy, helping him explain that he was subjected to the CRA, telling her what it was and that she was perfectly okay with knowing that she would not be the only woman marrying Naruto. Though this might have been the wrong thing to say in public, many of the women who had heard had looked at him with a glint in their eyes. He was sure that were it not for Yujito they would have tried to rape him. Once they had gotten their food and talked with Ayame and Tuchi, Naruto and Yujito had gone over to one of the lakes in Konoha, deciding to have a picnic together before cuddling up under one of the trees. Now the two were walking around Konoha and checking stores that Yujito saw items of interest in. Unlike Mei, who had an insatiable desire to shop, Yujito only had one area of interest when shopping: shinobi-related equipment. The woman, despite coming into her more feminine side with Naruto, was still at heart a ninja and seemed to have an obsession for high-quality ninja gear in a way that could rival Tenten's weapon fetish. "This store Narukoan," Yujito said, using her new pet name for him as she dragged the blonde to what Naruto recognized as the Higurashi weapon store. Naruto smiled as he and Yujito entered the shop. He laughed when he saw his fellow blonde stop in her tracks and stare wide-eyed at all of the merchandise. Naruto noticed there was even drool dribbling down her chin. "You're drooling, Yugi-chan," Naruto said as he wiped the small trail of saliva away with a finger. Yujito blushed as Naruto gave her a grin. He was about to make another comment when someone behind him spoke. Excuse me, but if you're not ninja, I'm afraid you can't come in here. Naruto turned around to see Tenten standing behind them. "Aw, Tenten, I thought I was a ninja." Tenten blinked as Naruto turned around. "Go." "Naruto, I didn't realize it was you. You look different in civilian clothes." Naruto shrugged. "I suppose, though I thought my hair would be enough of a giveaway to figure out who I was." Tenten held back an embarrassed blush. Naruto laced his hand with Yujito's as he pulled her forward. "Yujito, I would like you to meet Tenten, Konoha's foremost weapons expert. Tenten, I would like you to meet Yugi-chan, a woman I plan on spending the rest of my life with." Both of the girls blinked at Naruto's introduction. Yujito blushed while Tenten held in a sigh of disappointment. While she was not a fangirl like Ino and Sakura had been in their younger days, where they would try to get with anyone who was hot and from a powerful clan, she would not deny that Naruto was by far the most physically attractive man she had ever met. Tenten looked at him with an odd expression as she remembered something. "Wait, I thought you were with that red-haired woman." The weapon mistress's eyes narrowed. "If you're cheating on her, I'm a sweat kami." Naruto groaned. "What is it with you people and cheating? If you looked up the laws in the Konoha clan charter regarding any member who is the last of their clan, it states that they are eligible for the CRA and must wed at least 4 women by the time of their 18th birthday, otherwise the council gets to choose wives for them." Tenten bowed her head for a second. She had not realized that, though in her defense she did not know much about the clan charter seeing as how she was not in a clan. "I'm sorry," Tenten said in a small voice. "No, it's all right," Naruto replied as he heaved a sigh. "Sorry for snapping at you. This has happened several times, so I'm a little snappy when it comes to that subject." Naruto turned his head and smiled at Yujito as she began to rub his back in a soothing circle pattern. "Thanks, Yugi-chan," Naruto said as he leaned in and gave her a soft kiss on the lips. Tenten blushed as the two kissed. "So if you're in the CRA then?" "I already have 4 women I plan on marrying," Naruto interrupted. While he would admit Tenten was cute, he had no romantic interest in her. Tenten sighed a bit before perking up. She did not know him that well, so it was only a minor disappointment. It just would have been nice to see if anything could have happened between them. Besides, they could still be friends. "So what can I get for you today?" Tenten asked as she changed the subject. "Oh, we're just looking around," Naruto replied with an offhand air. Tenten nodded as she turned to Yujito. "So I don't think I've ever seen you in the store before." "That's because I'm not from here," Yujito replied as she looked around the store. "I'm from Kumo." Tenten's eyes widened. "I see, so how do you know Naruto?" Yujito looked over at her as she spoke. "I met him when he and Jiraiya had come to Kumo." "Yugi-chan here is a Jinchuriki like me," Naruto said, surprising Tenten. Thanks to his announcement she knew what he was, but she had not known there were others like him aside from Gaara. "She helped me with my training to use the fuzzball's chakra," Naruto continued with a grin, and he could have sworn he heard a grumble of insolent ninjen in his mind, "though I'm still not as good with my Bija's chakra as she is." "I see," Tenten said as she did not know what else to say. "Well, you might not want to tell Niji about." "I wouldn't worry," Naruto reassured her. "That was the Sandame Reikage. The Yandame has no interest in the Hyuga clan." Naruto and Yujito spent some time talking with Tenten. When they decided to leave, Naruto ended up buying several kunai that could channel elemental chakra and several exploding tags. After they left, Naruto looked up at the sky and noticed the sun was starting to set. "Hey Yugi-chan," Naruto said, getting the young woman's attention. Naruto wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "There's something I want to show you." He didn't even give her a chance to respond as he disappeared within a sushin, reappearing on top of the Hokage monument. Yujito was about to ask Naruto what that was about when she turned and saw the village from atop their perch. Oh wow. The entire village looked like it was on fire, the reds, yellows, oranges and purples mixing together, forming one of the most amazing sunsets she had seen. "I know, right?" Naruto said with a grin, gently grabbing Yujito's hand as he led her over to one of the spikes from his father's hair. Sitting down, the blonde shinobi pulled Yujito in between his legs, wrapping his arms securely around her waist. Yujito leaned into his back, letting her head rest against his as he set his on her shoulder. For several minutes they stayed like his, letting each other bask in the comforting presence of the other. After a while Naruto spoke up, "I always used to come here when I was kid, whether it was to think or just get away from the villagers. This has always been one of my favorite spots. It's kind of funny really, all this time I had come up here and sat on my father's head and never knew it." "Perhaps you knew instinctually that he was your father," Yujito said as she turned her head and kissed Naruto's cheek. Maybe," Naruto replied with a grin. "What about your mother?" Yujito asked. She had always been curious about his parents. She of course knew of his father but had never really heard much about his mom. She only knew her last name was Uzumaki. "My mother's name was Kushina Uzumaki, who was a kunoichi from Yuzushiogakure no Sato." The rest of their time on the Hokage monument was spent with Naruto telling Yujito what he knew of his mother. Omake, repercussions of an author PT3. Naruto sighed as he finally managed to slip his way past the last horde of fangirls and reach his destination. He grinned at how he had finally been able to get rid of, or at least avoid the nuisances that were fangirls. It had taken a while but Naruto had found a book specifically designed to avoid them. It was called Fangirl 101, How to Identify and Avoid Fangirls. The book was an absolute godsend for the blonde. Odd thing about the book though was the writer. It was apparently written by Itachi Uchiha. Naruto had to laugh at that. One of his biggest problems for the future had just given him the solution to one of his largest issues right now. He would have to thank the man before they fought. Naruto entered the place he had spent an hour trying to get to with a large smile on his face. Walking over to the front desk, Naruto tapped on it to get the attention of the young woman manning it. Said woman looked up and felt heat spread to her cheeks as she recognized him. Thankfully she realized the need to be professional while on the job and greeted him properly, albeit she was still blushing. "How can I help you today?" she asked. "I'd like to spend the day in one of your onsens," Naruto replied as he unsealed Gamachan. "Very well Namikaze-sama." The young girl looked at their standing price for the day. "Your total comes to 10,000.00 yen. Naruto nodded as he handed the girl the appropriate amount, sealing the wallet up again. Naruto began to make his way over to the male changing rooms when the woman stopped him. "Wait." Naruto turned around to see the young woman holding up his book. "Can you sign this please?" Naruto looked at the girl before sighing. Grabbing the book he unsealed one of the few injutsu brushes he always kept on hand. "What's your name?" Naruto asked as he signed. "Miari," the girl answered with a light blush staining her cheeks. "All right," Naruto said as he finished signing and handed the book back. "Thank you so much," Miari squealed as she began to cuddle the book to her chest. Naruto just smiled and walked out. Miari continued cuddling the book to her breast, however she blinked a few seconds as she felt she was forgetting something. Finally a gasp escaped her as she remembered. "Oh no! I forgot to tell him today was mixed bathing." Naruto finished taking off his clothes. Folding them up he put them in one of the baskets. Almost as soon as he opened the door he knew something was wrong. Opening it all the way Naruto saw that there were females in the hot spring. Lots and lots of females. As the group of girls, which seemed to be at least in the number of about 50, stared at him, Naruto began to sweat. Hello," he said weakly. As if by some signal all the girls stood up. "Gets Namikaze-sama. Let's get him." Naruto paled as the girls rushed him. He could not get away in time as they grabbed him. All of them yelling about how amazing he was and asking if they could have his children, all the while grabbing onto parts that only belonged to 4 women. Naruto cried anime tears, knowing that this was the end. He was so scared he never even thought of using Kariwimi or Hiraishin to escape. In a tree overlooking the hot spring, Jiraiya of the Sannin was furiously scribbling down in his notepad. "Damn, that Gaki's an absolute gold mine." Jiraiya listened to Naruto's screams for help and to not touch his meat stick. "I'm so glad I let slip he was going to the hot springs today," the white-haired Sannin smirked. "Serves him right for all the times he and his women beat on me." For the next few hours Jiraiya watched and wrote as Naruto struggled furiously to keep the rabid, mouth-foaming fangirls away from his family goods. It was the day of the 3rd and final stage of the Chunin exams, and it seemed as if the entirety of Konoha had managed to get tickets. The stadium was filled to the brim with people from all over the elemental nations, many of who had come to see this generation's lineup of ninja. People from all stations in life, from daimyos to paupers, had come for what many were sure would be an exciting set of matches. Of course, it also helped that everyone finally got to see the newest and possibly one of the famous or infamous, depending on whom you asked, ninja. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze was standing with the genin who had made it to the finals, in the center of the stadium where everyone could see them. He looked out at the crowd and noticed that many of the people there were pointing to him as they spoke. The blonde shinobi was really beginning to rethink his position on whether or not being so well known was a good thing. When he had been younger, he would have killed for this kind of attention. Now I just want some peace and quiet. He shook himself out of his thoughts and looked up at the Kage booth to see the 4 Kages who were in attendance this year being seated with their bodyguards. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Tsunade looked out over the crowd that this year had turned up. It was exactly what she had expected the turnout to be this year. The blonde Hokage had sent several personal letters to daimyos and anybody who she deemed as important to let them know that she had a special attraction for them at the Chunin exams this year. Hokage Dano. Tsunade turned around to see Mei Terumi greeting her with a smile, walking up to her with her 2 bodyguards on either side. Mizukage Dano, Tsunade greeted as the woman took a seat on the blonde's left. You know, this is the first Chunin exam I've actually been to as a Kage, Mei said as she looked down at the stadium, smiling as she saw Naruto. It's rather exciting. It is a rather interesting things to see from this perspective. The 2 women and their bodyguards turned to see Gaara and his 2 siblings walking up to them. I myself had the same feeling the first time I watched the Chunin exams as a Kage. Kazekage Dano, it's a pleasure to see you again, Tsunade greeted. How was the trip here? Gaara took off his Kage hat as he sat down on the left-hand side of Mei. It was fine, there was nothing very eventful that happened. Gaara turned to Mei. You are the new Mizukage, correct? He asked. I am, Mei said as she held out a hand, which Gaara accepted after a bit. I have heard many things about you from Narukoi. Gaara cocked an eyebrow at the suffix. He absently wondered if the Mizukage and Naruto had a relationship outside of just what he did for her during the Civil War. When Naruto had visited Suna, he had not mentioned being close to Kiri's new leader. Then again, Gaara had gotten the feeling that there were a lot of things his blonde friend had not mentioned back then. He has spoken of me? Gaara inquired. Mei smiled. Quite often, he told me about the similarities you 2 have with your past. While Gaara's siblings were slightly shocked, the red-haired Kazekage merely nodded in understanding. Looks like everyone else is already here. The 3 Kages turned their head to the voice to find A.B. and Yujito walking up to them. It looks like this year has gained quite the crowd. I don't think I've seen so many people at one exam. We have gotten a pretty big turnout this year, Tsunade agreed as the Raikage took the seat on her right. Though it may be that some of the people here are really just coming to see one of Konoha's more infamous shinobi. The Raikage laughed. Yes, that would not surprise me. People always seem to have something of a fandom for certain powerful figures in the shinobi world. And I must admit few seem to fill that requirement as well as Naruto-san does. Kankuro leaned into Temari's ear as he whispered, it seems that Naruto has really gotten around. He could not believe that the little pipsqueak who had only worn orange and screamed Databeo at the top of his lungs was so famous. Not only famous but apparently had some kind of intimate relationship with the Mizukage, who in his humble opinion was a complete babe. I know what you mean, Temari whispered back. He seems to know just about every Kage in the elementals. In fact, the only one he does not seem to be friends with is the Tsuchikage, and that's just because Iwa hates his father. Yujito-chan, Mei greeted the younger woman with a smile. Are you looking forward to seeing the kids Narukoi trained in action? Yujito looked at the red-haired woman and offered her own smile. Despite their rocky start, the 2 had ended up becoming friends. I am, knowing Naruko, they should be able to put up quite the fight. As the 2 women talked, the other ninja in the booth looked at them, most wondering how the 2 knew each other. None of the other Kages or their bodyguards besides Tsunade knew that Mei and Yujito had both been staying at the Namikaze estate. Tsunade had made Naruto tell her his relationship with all of the girls he planned on marrying. The only female she did not know he was dating was Konan. Even then Naruto had forced her to come to his estate before he told her anything, making sure that he told her in the most secure location he could think of so that the information was away from prying eyes. Most people would assume that the young man was being paranoid, but Tsunade knew that with all of the enemies he had in and outside of the village, paranoia was a good thing. Tsunade looked out at the crowd, specifically the daimyo's booth, in an effort to make sure that all the dignitaries who had come for the exams were present. Nodding to herself, the blonde Hokage stood up from her seat and walked to the ledge. She raised her hands in a grandiose gesture as she began her speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome all of you to the Chunin exams." A roar of approval came up from the crowd. Tsunade waited for it to die down before she continued. "This year we have 9 contestants who have proven their worth, showing skills beyond their status. Today you will get to see these talented young ninja in action. Let the Chunin exams begin." "You seem quite good at riling up the crowd, Hokage Dano," Mei complimented as Tsunade returned to her seat. Mei herself had never been all that good at speeches, even short ones, at least not to the masses. She could do it, of course. No Kage worth their weight would be unable to give a good rallying speech, but it had never been her forte. "Thanks, I guess. I honestly hate speeches," Tsunade said, getting a trickle of laughter to run through the Kage booth. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Before we begin this exam, there are a few new additions to this exam that I have added, Naruto said as the tournament started. "First, we have the same rule as the one in the prelims. You listen to what I say when I say it. Failure to do this will result in your immediate termination from the exams. Next, to make this exam a little more challenging and entertaining, I have placed several traps all throughout this arena." Many of the genin felt a sheen of sweat on their skin at seeing the sadistic leer on Naruto's face. There may be other surprises in store as well, problems that will arise and force you to think on your feet. I hope all of you have prepared well this past month. Now, Naruto began. "Let's get to the first battle, Juka Karotake vs Hanabi Hyuga. Everyone else please leave the arena floor and go up to the fighter's booth." As the other 7 genin left the arena floor, Hanabi and Juka stayed, moving to opposite sides of the arena. Hanabi got into a classic Jukan stance and flared her byakugan, making the veins around her temples bulge. Juka got into the standard Suna Academy stance. Neither spoke yet as they waited for the signal to start. "Are both fighters ready?" Naruto asked and received a nod from both of them. Bringing up his hand, Naruto made a downward slashing motion, then Hajime. The blonde shinobi jumped back as the battle started. "You should give up," Hanabi stated in her emotionless voice, using her Hyuga face to maximize effect. "You cannot win against me." Juka snorted, "Less talk, more action, little girl." Hanabi glared at her opponent and rushed towards Juka, hoping to get in close so she could use her Jukan taijutsu style. As the Hyuga heiress ran, Juka began going through hand seals, stopping on the Tori bird seal as he called out his jutsu. "Futon de Tapa. Wind release, great breakthrough." A large gust of wind hit Hanabi, attempting to lift her into the air. The young pale-eyed genin channeled chakra into the bottom of her feet, sticking to the ground as she let the gust pass her. When it did, she kicked off again. Closing the distance, she aimed a strike at one of the tenketsu on Juka's abdomen. However, the Suna genin jumped back, pulling out several kunai and wrapping exploding tags around them. He channeled some chakra into them and threw them at Hanabi. The Hyuga genin saw the kunai coming and began to spin. A Hakushokaten. Heavenly Divination Rotation. A blue shield of chakra surrounded the Hyuga heiress, deflecting the kunai and making them bounce off her shield. However, that did not stop the notes from exploding. The blue energy sphere was blown back a ways, dissipating to reveal a slightly burnt Hanabi. Said girl shook the cobwebs out of her head and began another charge. Juka began going through more hand seals as he continuously backpedaled, only to trip a wire and force both Hanabi and he to dodge as several kunai and shuriken came flying at them. Before Hanabi could recover, Juka redid his hand seals and called out his jutsu. Futon Rapusho. Juka thrust out his hand with his palm facing out. A blast of wind shot from his hand and towards Hanabi. Being able to see the chakra, Hanabi dodged the wind attack and managed to close the distance. In that instant it was over as the Hyuga Kunoichi closed off Juka's tenketsu points, knocking the Suna genin unconscious. Winner by knockout, Hanabi Hyuga. Naruto announced. The crowd cheered for Hanabi as she left the arena floor. Several medics came out with a stretcher, placing Juka on it before heading to the medical wing. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Your genin is quite talented, Hokage-sama, Agara said as the fight ended. Though she was quite reckless, Mei spoke up before Tsunade could say anything. Had it been a real battle and she charged a wind user with more powerful techniques, she would have died. Tsunade nodded. I have to agree with you, Mizukage-dano, and she has good techniques but needs to work on her strategy. Still, at least she's got spirit, the Raikage said. That's always a plus in my books. The other Kages looked at him oddly for a moment, but nodded in agreement. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Next match, Konohamaru Sarutobi and Renji Abari, could you two please come down to the arena floor? Naruto called out over the noise of the crowd. While Renji walked down the stairs, Konohamaru in his typical fashion jumped out of the fighter's box, using chakra to lessen the impact of his fall. Konohamaru moved to one side of the stadium while Renji took the other. Knowing he would need to use something other than a kunai for this battle, the young Sarutobi heir unsealed his bow staff, twirling it around before getting into his stance. In response to the younger genin bringing out his weapon, Renji unsheathed his sword and got into a standard kenjutsu stance. I hope you're ready for me to kick your ass. Konohamaru shouted in an enthusiastic and cocky voice. Renji's sweat dropped. This kid is like a miniature version of Ichigo with that attitude. Out loud he said, I think you're a little too cocky for your own good, kid. I'll enjoy taking you down a few pegs. Naruto looked at both fighters. Are you two ready? Receiving a nod he shouted, then. Hajime! The two shinobi rushed each other, clashing their respective weapons together in an attempt to hit the other. Renji came it with a diagonal slash that was blocked by Konohamaru, who used his staff's double-sidedness to counterattack. The Konoha genin staff managed to clip Renji's side, spinning with the blow. The Kiri shinobi spun around and aimed a slash at Konohamaru's midsection. Konohamaru parried the blow and began to spin his staff in increasingly complex maneuvers. Renji jumped back so as not to get hit. Timing his attack, Renji thrust his blade in the complex weaving of the bow staff, stopping it in its tracks. Renji pushed against the staff and tried to skewer Konohamaru, who leaned back and twisted his body out of the way, spinning his staff at the same time to knock Renji's sword off course and give the young Sarutobi an opening. Planting his staff in the ground, Konohamaru used it to increase the force of his kick as he smashed a foot into Renji's face. Renji went flying back but managed to flip in mid-air and land on his feet. Katan, Gokaiku no Jutsu! The redhead looked up and cursed as a giant fireball came barreling towards him. Renji put on a burst of speed as he jumped out of the way. Seeing Renji dodge, Konohamaru went through more hand seals and slammed them into the ground. Doton, Doryuden! Earth Release, Earth Dragon Missile. A dragon head rose out of the ground and began to fire powerful mud balls at Renji, forcing the Kiri genin to dodge. Konohamaru pulled out several kunai and shuriken from his pouch, throwing them at Renji. Seeing the kunai coming, Renji used his sword to deflect the ones that came near him. The barrage stopped and the pineapple head tried to rush Konohamaru, with said genin doing the same. Neither saw the seals on the ground until it was almost too late. When they did, their eyes went wide and they were forced to kariwimi as the ground under them exploded, sending fire and eth into the sky as well as tearing huge gouts in the field. They both appeared on opposite ends of the field. Looking at each other, they kicked off the ground and tried to move in close range, albeit much more cautiously than last time. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Well, this is turning out to be quite the fight. Said as he watched the two genin enter a close combat battle again. I have to admit to being impressed. They are getting pretty good, Mei said as she studied the battle, though they could think more tactically. Still, I think they might both be chunin material, but we'll have to see more before deciding that, Tsunade said. Their combat level is definitely chunin though. Yujito tilted her head. They have both been trained very well. Most chunin don't actually learn all it means to be a chunin until after they earn the rank anyway. The kitten is right, yo, that means they gotta gain experience to know. B agreed as a tick mark formed on Yujito's head. Damn it, B, shut up with your rapping. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto watched as the two genin went at it. Their battle was impressive for genin. While it would not compare with say his battles with Akatsuki or Yagura, they were displaying quite a bit of skill. Naruto was glad he had taken to training Konohamaru for the month hiatus. Had he not received the blonde's harsh training, there would be no way the younger genin would be able to keep up with Renji. As it was, the two were evenly matched. Renji was faster, but Konohamaru could use both sides of his weapon, negating Renji's advantage. Renji came at Konohamaru with a slash. Leaning back, Konohamaru let the blow pass over him and attached an exploding tag to the flat side the Kiri genin's blade. He jumped away just as the tag exploded. Konohamaru was breathing heavily as he waited for the smoke to clear. When it did, he saw that Renji was on the ground, his sword several feet away. Konohamaru gave Renji no time to recover as he made a single Kagebushin and held out his hand. The clone came up and began to help Konohamaru with the manipulation for his jutsu. Soon enough, a familiar spinning ball of chakra formed in the palm of the young genin's hand. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto taught him the Rasengan. Tsunade shouted as she stood up from her seat. As she stared at the infamous ball of chakra, she could feel several different emotions running through her. The first was pride at the fact that Naruto could teach someone an A-rank technique within a month, as well as the fact that Konohamaru was able to learn such a powerful jutsu. And anger at the fact that Naruto taught such a powerful technique to a genin. She would be having a word with the blonde when this was over. I suspected Narukoi would do something like this, Mei said as Tsunade sat back down. I have to admit I am impressed that a genin was able to learn such a powerful technique within a month. It does speak well of the boy's skills, the Raikage said, as well as that of the teacher. However, the fact that he is using such a technique when he doesn't need it also shows he needs more restraint, Yujito interrupted. Right now the boy is just showing off. The others in the booth nodded in agreement. XXXXXXXXXX. Konohamaru ran right at the red-haired Kiri shinobi, smashing the Rasengan right into Renji's stomach. The red head was thrown back from the power of the technique and hit the ground. When Renji did not get back up, Naruto nodded to himself as he announced the winner. Winner by knockout is Konohamaru Sarutobi. All right. Yes. Konohamaru jumped up and down in the air as the crowd cheered for him. Meanwhile, Renji was placed on a stretcher and taken to the medical wing. XXXXXXXXXXXX. These matches are quite entertaining, the Raikage said as the others turned to him. Watching all of these battles makes me wish I was down there fighting right now. It was quite impressive, though Konohamaru needs to learn when to use such powerful techniques, Tsunade said. Still, they both showed a decent amount of skill. Your ninja is quite impressive with a sword, the busted blonde turned to Mei. Thank you, Hokage Dano, Mei said in gratitude. He is one of the people I am hoping will revive the Kiri no Shinobigatana Nananinshu. Well, he is pretty talented, Yujito said. With some more time, training and experience, that goal is quite possible. Who is his trainer? Raiga Korosuke, Mei answered, surprising the other three Kages and their bodyguards. I thought Raiga became a missing ninja several years ago? Tsunade questioned the busted red head. He did, Mei answered. Narukoi fought him about a year ago. Rather than kill him, he brought Raiga to me. I had offered the man a position in the village again. He accepted on a few conditions and had a hand in training the people I am trying to make into the new swordsman. Mei shivered a bit when she had mentioned his conditions. Aside from keeping Ranmaru with him at all times, the man had demanded that he be allowed to give his enemies funerals. She had been tempted to just kill him after that, but with her village in desperate need of powerful shinobi, she had not been able to afford to do that. The others noticed her shiver but ignored it as they went back to the battles, though a few of the people there continued to wonder how close she was to Naruto to use a nickname like that. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Will Raiden and Ichigo Kurosaki come down? Naruto called out the next names to battle. Ichigo appeared a little ways away, his sword out at the ready. Raiden walked out of the entrance, moving to the opposite side of the orange-haired genin. Ichigo grinned as he got into a wide two-handed stance, his sword in front of him running parallel to the ground. Raiden in turn got into a taijutsu stance, presenting his profile view with his left foot in front and his right behind him, ready to push the balls of his feet. I hope you're ready to lose, Ichigo replied in his typical cocksure tone, a smirk on his face. I believe you should wait until after the battle is finished to gloat, Raiden replied, lest you end up eating your words. Are both fighters ready? Naruto asked. He received a nod from Raiden. You bet I am. Ichigo said as he grinned, let's do this. Naruto nodded, then Hajime. Ichigo disappeared in a burst of speed, reappearing right next to Raiden swinging his sword. Raiden ducked under the sword and came up after it passed over his head, aiming a punch at Ichigo who jumped back. Raiden went through several hand seals, slamming his hands on the ground. He called out his jutsu. Raitun, Ikazuchi Hakai. A large bolt of lightning tore through the landscape, heading towards Ichigo who jumped into the air to avoid it. Raiden jumped in the air to meet him, taking out a kunai and piercing him through the stomach. Only for Ichigo to burst into water. A large blue and ethereal-looking wave came barreling up from the ground. Raiden used a Kariwimi to escape the attack. Appearing near a tree on the other side of the arena, he tried to think up a plan but had no time as a sizzling noise reached his ear. Turning his head, he cursed to find several exploding tags. He jumped out of the tree just as it exploded. As he landed on the ground, Ichigo appeared right in front of him. Raiden ducked under the swing sent his way, getting down on his hands and pushing out with a kick. Ichigo used the flat end of his blade to block. Skidding back from the force, he looked up to see Raiden going through more hand signs. Raitun Raikyu. A ball of lightning the size of a cannonball shot out of Raiden's mouth. In return, Ichigo channeled some chakra into his sword. As soon as the lightning ball came close enough to him, the orange-haired shinobi sliced it in half. A blade of blue chakra was launched from the end of Ichigo's sword and flew towards Raiden. The Kumo shinobi was forced to jump out of the way. However, Ichigo appeared right next to him and the young man was not fast enough to dodge the kick to his face. Raiden flew back and into the air from the kick, flipping around so he landed on his feet. He grabbed his bleeding nose and set it back in place with a crunch, looking up to see that Ichigo was gone. He looked around only for instincts to kick in and make him roll to the left. A good thing he had too. As soon as he did, a large blue blade on chakra slashed into the spot he had been standing on, destroying the area and leaving a crater. The young man stared at the spot he had previously been, giving Ichigo the distraction needed to come in behind Raiden and smash the butt end of his sword into the back of the Kumo Genin's neck. As Raiden crumbled to the ground, Naruto announced the winner. Winner by knockout is Ichigo Kurosaki. Ichigo raised his hand as the crowd cheered, walking back into the entrance to the fighter's booth. Meanwhile, a medic team had placed Raiden on a stretcher, standing up to take him to the medical ward. XXXXXXXXXXXX. I have to admit that boy is impressive to defeat Raiden, A said as the fight ended. He is one of my better genin. Well, Ichigo has a lot of raw power to throw around, Mei replied. To be honest, were it not for that, I doubt he would have won. The boy lacks finesse. That reminds me of how Naruto used to be, Tsunade said, remembering how the blonde had been before his training trip. Mei looked over at the busted blonde woman with a smirk. Go? Do tell. Tsunade gave her own smirk as she began to tell stories of how the young blonde used to be before his training, much to the amusement of the others in the box. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto felt a shiver run down his spine. I get the feeling someone's talking about me, and it's not in a good way. He shook his head of the thought before focusing on the task at hand. Will Udon and Otame Shinji please come to the arena floor? Naruto called out, resisting the urge to sigh. At first, being a proctor actually sounded kind of fun, but now it was just boring. All I'm doing is saying the same thing over again, the blonde teen thought as he watched Udon and Otame come down and stand on opposite sides of the arena. Are both fighters ready? Naruto asked as he looked at the two. He received a nod from each and decided to get this started, then Hajime. The two genin instantly jumped away from each other, Udon going through hand signs while Otame threw several shuriken enhanced with his wind chakra. As the kunai came in, Udon spread his hands in front of him in what looked like a defensive gesture. Raitun, Magin Chikajai Kyuten. Lightning release, magnetic reversal. The air around Udon became saturated with static electricity. It was unnoticeable to all except those with Dojutsu and those who could sense lightning chakra. When the kunai came into the field, they stopped instantaneously, turned around and headed right back to a surprised Otame. Said Suna Genin was able to only just get out of the way, though it was not without injury as the 2 slashes that now ran across his left arm indicated. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. It looks like you've got a right-hand user, Gay said as he looked at the boy with the bowl cut and glasses. And that technique, simple but extremely effective. I take it that Naruto-san has been teaching him as well? Yes, Tsunade said as she looked over at the Raikage. How did you know? The Raikage laughed. It's quite simply really, he used that same jutsu on me during our first spar. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Udon did not give Otame any time to react to the unexpected attack from his own weapons. Charging straight at the Suna Genin, Udon pulled several kunai from his pouch and tossed them at Otame. The older Genin made to dodge, jumping up and to the left. In response, Udon manipulated his fingers, which had chakra strings attaching them to the kunai, and changed their direction back towards Otame. The Suna Genin was impaled through the arms and legs. Seconds later he burst into smoke before a log appeared in the man's place. Futon, Kaziterite. Wind release, wind cutter. A fierce wind with several large wind blades smashed into Udon. At least it smashed into where Udon was as the Genin soon disappeared in a puff of smoke, a log replacing where he had been. Otame jumped out from the tree he had been hiding in, looking around to see if he could spot Udon. His eyes widened a bit as he rolled to the left when Udon appeared right next to him, aiming a slash for the Suna Genin's neck. Otame pushed himself up onto his feet as he turned to face Udon, going through several hand seals. Futon, Rapusho. A gust of wind hit Udon before he could react, sending him flying towards a tree. He was able to flip himself around and land on the trunk, however he froze as a seal appeared under him, paralyzing him for several precious seconds. Seconds which Otame used to chuck several shuriken at the now frozen Konoha Genin. Thankfully the seal disrupted in time for Udon to do a quick Karawimi. Appearing on a tree several meters away. Reaching into his kunai pouch, Udon pulled out several shuriken and flung them at Otame. Said Suna Genin turned around just in time to see them and began going through several hand seals. Futon, de Tapa. A gust of wind knocked the shuriken off course, but the distraction was all Udon needed to get close. Sending punch to Otame's chest, it was swatted away by the Genin's other hand but had served its purpose. When Udon jumped away, Otame looked down and felt his eyes widen as he saw the exploding tag on his shirt, the slight sizzle showing the tag was active. The sizzle ended and the tag exploded, however Otame was able to rip his shirt off in time, revealing his white undershirt. Frowning Udon threw several kunai at him. Otame saw this and used a kawarimi, appearing behind a tree. He sighed as he tried to come up with a plan. Looking out from behind the tree he frowned when he saw Udon was no longer there. That was when everything went black as he felt the butt end of a kunai smash into the back of his neck. Naruto saw Udon come out from behind a tree, dragging an unconscious Otame. Otame is unable to continue the battle, therefore the winner is Udon, Naruto announced. As Udon made his way to the stand and Otame was taken out by a medical team, Naruto called the next match. Will Rukia Kachiki and Anui Tetino please come down to the arena floor? The two Genin walked down to the floor and stood on opposite sides of each other. Rukia had a hand on the hilt of her blade, but had not unsheathed it as she took a Batajutsu stance. Anui meanwhile had taken out 2 serrated kunai, with small traces of lightning coming out of the blades. Are both fighters ready? Asked Naruto, receiving a sharp nod from both of them, then. Hajime. Once the word Hajime left Naruto's mouth, Rukia disappeared in a burst of speed. Reappearing right in front of Anui, Rukia's sword came out and attempted to bisect the Genin. However, Anui had been able to see her movement and blocked the attack with his kunai. Rukia was forced to jump back as a lightning coursed from Anui's blades and through hers. Rukia shook her head to clear it after receiving the shock, however Anui was not going to let her get any rest as he came after her. Rukia was forced to duck dodge and weave her way around the 2 kunai, knowing that she would be in serious trouble if she got hit by those. Knowing that she could not use her sword in this instance, Rukia jumped back and went through a series of one-handed seals. Sueton Teppadama. Several cannon-sized globs of water shot from the Kiri Kunoichi's mouth, forcing Anui to jump back and dodge as the water balls smashed into the ground. Doing so left the young man open to attack. Appearing in front of the boy, Rukia managed to kick the kunai out of the Kumo Genin's hands. Unfortunately for her, Anui did not need kunai to channel lightning chakra. He grabbed onto Rukia's extended leg, channeling lightning through his hands and into the leg. Rukia let out a muffled scream of pain as she bit her lip. Anui began to spin around, using his and Rukia's combined weight to fling her into the air. He began to go through several hand seals. Raiton Bakufu. Lightning release, blast. A bolt of lightning shot out of Anui's extended hand. The lightning hit the still airborne Rukia, sending electricity coursing through the Kiri Genin's body. Only for said body to turn into water. Ninpo, Kirigakure no Jutsu. Ninja Art, Hidden Mist Jutsu. A thick mist began to spread out around the arena. Since there was not a very large water source nearby, it was only enough to hamper visibility rather than render everything invisible. Anui went on guard as he peered through the mist. It was not enough that he could not see through it, however it would certainly affect his vision and skew it enough that it could prove costly. That was when his instincts started screaming at him to move. He followed them just as Rukia dropped from the sky, slashing at where he had been. Thus began the game of cat and mouse as Rukia would appear and try to take Anui out and then disappear 1 second later. Worse, because the Genin's vision was skewered by the mist, he could not accurately predict how close Rukia actually was. It often looked like she was farther away than she really was. XXXXXXXXXXXX. This is turning out to be quite the exciting battle, the Raikage said as he tried to peer into the mist. Your Genin is good. To be able to fight so well despite being handicapped by facing against someone with an opposing affinity. Thank you Raikage Dano, Mei replied. To be honest, she is one of my better strategists among the Genin. It was why I placed her on this team. She paused and thought for a moment. That and she's the only one her other 2 teammates are actually afraid of among the Genin. So she keeps them in line, Yujito said with a smirk. Mei grinned. Of course, you know how men are. The women in the booth smirked at that comment, all of them knowing of the trouble men cause and how much of a handful they can be. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Anui dodged another attack from Rukia as he tried to come up with a plan. He knew of a jutsu he could use, but it required more chakra than he had. As he dodged a slash that came at him from the right, he reached his hand into his pouch and pulled out 2 soldier pills. This would leave him exhausted afterwards, but he felt it would be his best chance to win. Swallowing them, he felt a burst of chakra and began going through several hand seals. Raiton Reikonami. Lightning release, lightning wave. Lightning burst from Otame's body as he spread his arms wide, sending what looked like a wave of lightning in all directions. There was a shout of pain from somewhere within the mist as it began to clear. Otame dropped onto his knees with his breathing heavy. When the mist cleared, it showed Rukia on her knees with electricity sparking off of her, though she was still conscious. Omate grunted as he stood up and made his way over to the black-haired girl. When he got next to her, he put a kunai to her neck. Only for his eyes to widen in shock as Rukia turned into a puddle of water. He had no time to react as a blade touched his throat. Surrender, Rukia commanded. Anui sighed as he realized he had no chakra left to get out of this. I surrender. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. That girl is quite impressive, Tsunade said. She has excellent strategies. Thank you, I taught her about tactical combat myself, Mei replied with pride in her voice. I have to admit your Genin has amazing talent, Gei said. While Anui was not his most powerful shinobi, he was decent and the Kiri Genin had a disadvantage in element. Thank you Raikage Dano, Mei replied. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Winner by forfeit is Rukia Kachiki. Naruto shouted out to the crowd. As the crowd cheered, the 2 Genin left. Naruto sighed as the first half of the Chunin exam finals was over. He looked up at the stadium as he began to speak again. The first half of the Chunin exams are now over. We will be having a short 15-minute break for all guests to grab a bite and stretch their legs before moving on to the second round. As the spectators began to rise from their seats, Naruto turned his attention to the Kage booth. Grinning, he disappeared in a gentle breeze. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Tsunade along with the other Kages stood up in their chairs to stretch legs a bit, letting themselves get some of the feeling back. Despite being forced to sit at a chair all day due to their jobs, none of them actually got used to it, and the chairs they were in now were less comfortable than their Kage chairs. Those were some exciting matches, the Raikage said with a grin. I can't wait to see the rest. Tsunade chuckled. Yes, they were pretty good. We'll have to discuss who among them deserves to be Chunin since there are many potential candidates. There are a few who can make it to Chunin, Mei agreed, but I think it would be wise for us to wait until we see what else they are capable of, especially since the battles will get harder the more they fight, forcing them to think with a level head. You're pretty smart, yo, a pretty little thing like you knows how things go, Karabi said in his rap. This time he was not just smacked by Yujido, but also by Mei, who was looking at B with a creepy smile that spoke of him feeling immense pain if he said the wrong thing. B, stop rapping. Yujido growled. Especially about me, in that context, do so again and I'll melt you, Mei replied in that sweet and creepy voice. The men around her shivered at the tone, though Ao was glad that for once it was not directed at him. B actually paled at the threat. Having Yujido kick him was fine, he would usually be up right after since they only hurt when she was really pissed. But having a Kage say she was going to melt you, and knowing that she actually had the capability to do it with her Yotan Jutsu was an entirely different kettle of fish. Thankfully, before Hisei could say anything that would likely get him melted, a voice spoke up behind them. Now that isn't nice, Mei-chan. Everyone turned to see Naruto looking at them with a grin. I don't even think he can help his rapping. Though Naruto looked at B and the man felt a small shiver run through him. I would suggest that you not make any crude comments about her. Narukoi/Koen. Yujito and Mei greeted the blonde as they walked up to him. Naruto gave the two a smile as he pulled the two into an embrace, letting one of them each rest their head on his shoulder as they returned his hug. As this happened, everyone who did not know about his relationship with two women, meaning everyone except Tsunade, was looking at Naruto in shock. While the men were looking on in a mixture of shock and envy, Kankuro was even muttering about lucky blonde bastards, and Gaara's face actually looked to be the same color as his hair. Temari, however, was glaring at the two girls. Sure, she did not know Naruto that well, and when they first met she thought he was a brat, but even she could not help but feel jealous seeing those two girls with him now. Naruto chuckled as he wrapped his own arms around Mei and Yujido. How are you two doing up here? Not too boring, I hope. Not at all, Mei grinned as she lifted her head up and gave him a rather heated kiss, one that caused Kankuro to get a slight nosebleed from just watching. Breaking the kiss, she leaned her head back on his shoulder. The blonde shinobi barely had any time to react after Mei's rather passionate lip lock as Yujido claimed his lips next, moaning a bit as she sucked on his bottom lip. Pulling back, she gave Naruto her own smile. But it's much better now that you're here, the blonde woman finished for Mei as she too put her head back on Naruto's shoulder. That was something the two had started doing recently. Whenever one of them would speak, the other would finish it. Every time they did that, it sent pleasurable shivers down the blonde shinobi's spine. Naruto was sure that the two were doing it on purpose. He suspected that it was Mei's idea. Yujito, while she had her moments, she was never one to as outgoing or experimental as the red-haired Kage. That, and they have been hanging out together after that restaurant incident when I've been training Konohamaru, Moegi and Udon. Naruto gave a soft chuckle that the girls felt as a slight rumble in his chest. You know, you two are becoming insatiable, you know that? Only 'cause you spoiled us this week, Mei replied as she looked at him with a grin. I suppose so, Naruto said with a small smirk. I'm going to have to be careful around you girls. As the three continued their banter, the others looked at the pair in shock. Kankuro leaned over into his brother's ear and whispered, "Did you know Naruto was getting play like this from two hot women?" Gaara shook his head. I know. I wonder how he does it? Kankuro blinked for a moment as the words registered in his ear. When they did, he turned around and looked at his little brother in shock. Is Gaara actually thinking about girls? Kankuro wondered to himself. Gaara had become quite popular with the ladies of Suna, though Kankuro knew it was unintentional since his little brother knew nothing about women. To hear his little brother ask something like that was shocking. Yo, big bro, what's going on with those three, do you know? Killer Bee asked as he tried to turn away from the sight of the three, yet somehow found himself staring. Just shook his head, unable to come up with an answer as he too stared at the trio. It is too bad Jiraiya-sama is not here. I'm sure this would be great material to help him write his books. It was several minutes later when Naruto was forced to go back down to the arena floor, much to the girls' protest. However, he promised to make it up to them later, giving them a knowing look before leaving for the arena again. XXXXXXXXXXX. You know, I don't think I'll ever get tired of your cooking, Narukoi, Mei said as she took another bite of the food Naruto had prepared, moaning in delight as the food melted on her taste buds. On the other side of him, Yujito was nodding her head in agreement as she ate her food. It had only been a few hours since the Chunin exams ended. Each stage had gotten harder from the next, with Naruto occasionally making Kagebushin, forcing the genin to team up with each other, to creating storms with his unparalleled control of the elements. The final contestants had actually fought in a three-way battle. Akira, Ichigo and Konohamaru had been the three to make it into the final round, with the big surprise winner being Akira. Though maybe Naruto should have not been so surprised by the outcome, the Kumo Kunoichi had played it smart, merely let Ichigo and Konohamaru beat the crap out of each other, and when they had been sufficiently weakened she had knocked the two out. Out of the 9 genin who had participated in the exams, only Rukia, Akira and Udon had made it to Chunin. Some of the others had the skills of a Chunin, but did not know when to make a tactical withdrawal, the best two examples of this being Ichigo and Konohamaru. Still, that only seemed to get the two even more determined to do better next time. Of course, the two also vowed to defeat the other, having formed a rivalry during their three-way battle royal. I'm glad to hear that, Naruto replied as he took a bite of the food he had made for himself. Swallowing his bite before speaking again, I would be awfully disappointed if my food was no longer satisfactory to you. Currently he, Yujito and Mei were in the small paradisiacal lake Naruto and Mei had gone swimming in 2 weeks prior, having a picnic. The three were sitting under one of the many trees, a blanket was laid out under them and there was an assortment of food on top of it. It was their last night together, the two women would be leaving now that the exams were over and so Naruto had made them all a large dinner. Yujito grinned as she swallowed another piece of sushi. She had to admit, while Naruto's food was not as good as the sushi she got at Kenshi's, it was still quite delicious. Then it's a good thing you don't have to worry about that, though even if your food wasn't good, I'm sure we'd still love you. You know that sentence doesn't inspire that much confidence, Naruto said with a mock pout on his face. You make it sound like you might not feel the same way if my cooking was not as good as it was. Mei gave the blonde shinobi a teasing grin. Well, I didn't want to say anything but. For the rest of their time there the three talked and teased each other. Naruto gave an internal smile as the two women spoke like they had been good friends for years. He was glad they were no longer fighting. When everyone had had their fill of the food, Naruto resealed the picnic basket and blanket in a scroll. Standing up he grinned at the two before taking off his shirt and throwing it at the two women. So do you girls want to go for a swim? His answer came in the form of Mei and Yujito throwing their own clothes at his head right before they tackled him into the lake. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Sitting at her desk in the Hokage Tower, Tsunade was finishing up her report on the Chunin exams and the paperwork for Udon's promotion. She looked up at the clock and sighed as she realized how late it was, and I still have to do the regular paperwork after this, Tsunade groaned. What she wouldn't give for a cup or bottle of sake or 10. Unfortunately Shizen had come in once again and gotten rid of her secret stash again. Sighing in annoyance she worked harder to finish the paperwork so she could go home and get a drink. As she continued working a knock sounded at her door. Come in, she called without looking up. The door opened and 3 people walked in and stood in front of her desk. Tsunade-sama, the voice she recognized instantly sounded. Tsunade's eye twitched as she looked up to see Danzo Shimura, Hamura and Koharu, 3 people she did not want to see. What do you 3 want? Tsunade asked without bothering to do any of the customary greetings. In case you haven't noticed I have a lot of work to do. The 3 elders frowned at her disrespectful voice, but knowing what they came here for decided to let it go. Danzo stepped forward to speak. We are merely here as concerned citizens, Tsunade-sama. Oh? Tsunade asked, stopping her work as she looked at the 3 with a raised eyebrow. And what is there that could concern you 3? Hamura coughed into his hand as he spoke. We have been hearing many rumors about this Akatsuki that Jiraiya-sama has been spying on. We are concerned about the effects this could have on Konoha, especially when they come after Namikaze-san. Tsunade narrowed her eyes as she figured where this was going. She knew that the 3 would not leave their issue with Naruto alone. The only question was what were they planning? And why would you be concerned about Namikaze-san? You do know that he is an S-rank ninja, yes? One whom I am sure may even be more powerful than me. We know very well how powerful Namikaze-san is, Konoha retorted, however we feel it would be beneficial to give him some added protection. After all, with all the enemies he has now, leaving him without adequate protection would be foolhardy. So that's what they want, Tsunade thought as she now understood what they were after. They wanted to have one of Danzo's men to keep an eye on Naruto, someone who could find some kind of weakness they could exploit to bend him to their will. To be honest, she was surprised they were being so transparent. Normally she would have to look under what they were saying to find out what they really wanted. Though perhaps that could be accredited to the fact that they were getting desperate, Naruto had outplayed them in every game they had so far, they knew they were running out of options. And you think you have someone who is strong enough to protect Naruto? Tsunade asked incredulously, stalling for time. I don't know of any shinobi besides myself and Jiraiya who are able to fight S-rank ninja in combat, unless there is something you three are not telling me. To their credit, the three did not show any outward reaction to her threat. I can have one of my best security personnel accompany him on missions, Danzo said. They knew he had to be careful with this. Tsunade knew that Danzo's route operation was not disbanded as it was supposed to be. Tsunade's lips became a thin line as she listened to the man. She knew what his security personnel really was. The blonde knew he was actually referring to his supposed disbanded Rudumbu division. However, she also knew she could not prove it. Danzo was easily the most paranoid man she had ever met. He had covered his tracks so well that not even Jiraiya's spy network had been able to get more than a small glimmer of information. It was part of the reason neither she nor Sarutobi before her were ever able to try Danzo for treason. As she was thinking of what to do with their request, another thought came to her. Danzo wanted one of his root members to keep an eye on Naruto, however it could easily be used to get the reversed effect. If she could have Naruto get close to one of his men, they would be able to spy and possibly locate Danzo's base of operations. At the very least they could gain some useful information. From what Jiraiya had told her, Naruto was an expert in information gathering, stealth and espionage. Aside from that, the young man also had the uncanny ability to make friends out of people, even enemies, something that could and had proven useful on many occasions. That decided, Tsunade put on her poker face as she spoke. I suppose what you say has some merit. Very well, I will allow one of Danzo's personal security guards onto a team with Naruto. Though he may not always be teamed up with him, he will go on any missions of importance. While Hamura and Koharu were nodding their heads in a pleased fashion, Danzo narrowed his eyes at the woman. She had relented far easier than he had expected. The old warhawk was not naive enough to believe that Tsunade would just let one of his men on Naruto's squad just like that. While Tsunade could not prove it, Danzo knew that she knew of his Rudumbu. This led him to wonder what she was planning. He shook the thought off. Even if she had some kind plan, it won't matter in the end. He would still get what he wants. I'm glad to see we came to an agreement, Hokage-sama, Danzo said. I will have my chosen man here tomorrow morning. Tsunade nodded. Very well. As the three elders left her room, Tsunade turned her chair to look out at the village. She was taking a risk by allowing one of Danzo's men to get close to Naruto, someone who could potentially harm or even assassinate the Uzumaki Namikaze heir. However, she had faith in the blonde's abilities to get through most situations, and she knew that Danzo would not be bold enough to try that. Not yet, at least. She could only hope that this would work out in the end. Turning back to her desk, Tsunade picked up the first sheet on the stack of paperwork. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto let out a soft grunt as he rolled himself over Yujido, now lying down in the center of the bed. Mei rolled over as she wrapped one arm around his chest, throwing her leg over him and pulling herself close enough that Naruto could feel her still hardened nipples as they rubbed against him. On his other side, a tired and sweaty Yujido did the same thing, lightly purring as she nuzzled into his neck. Naruto smiled as he wrapped an arm around their waists, pulling them flushed up against him so that there was no room in between their bodies. Both girls let out a low moan and then a sigh of content as Naruto began to rub his hands up and down their backs. I'm gonna miss this feeling, Yujido murmured as Naruto's natural warmth began to lull her to sleep. Mei did not say anything, merely hummed in agreement, already falling prey to the natural warmth the blonde shinobi emitted, her stamina nowhere near Yujido's due to her not being a Jinchuriki. Naruto kissed both Yujido and Mei on the forehead, so will I, but it's not like we won't see each other. I know. Yujito sighed as she kissed Naruto's shoulder. Doesn't mean I'm not gonna miss getting spoiled. Naruto let out a soft chuckle. Don't worry, eventually I'll be able to spoil you girls like this every day. Naruto kissed her head again. Now let's follow Mei's example and get some rest. Yujito smiled as she did as asked, letting sleep take her. XXXXXXXXXXXX. You called Danzo-sama? Danzo looked at the figure kneeling before him, a young man who was wearing a bird mask that could not be any older than 17. Yet he was also one of Danzo's most valuable assets, having been trained at an early age when the Warhawk was unable to get Naruto into his root program. I have a new mission for you, Danzo said without preamble. You are to watch Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Find out everything you can about him, strengths, weaknesses and any people he is close to. Do you understand your mission? Hi Danzo-sama, the young boy spoke in an emotionless tone. Good, take off your mask, you will not need it for this mission, Danzo ordered. The young man took off his mask revealing coal-black eyes, black hair and pale skin. Still kneeling, the youth set the mask on the floor, keeping his head bowed down for his leader. Danzo gave a small smile to himself. This boy would complete his mission, the bandaged man had made sure of that. For this mission your name will be Sai. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto looked into his bowl of steaming ramen with a sigh. Twirling the noodles on his chopsticks, he brought it to his mouth and began eating. It had only been a day since Mei and Yujito left, and he was already missing the two women. He had gotten used to waking up with the two next to him and spending the time he was not using to train himself or others with them. Shaking his head, he finished eating his ramen, drinking the broth straight from the bowl before unsealing his frog wallet and taking out the necessary money where he put it on the table. Thanks for the food, Tuchi-san. Naruto called out to the ramen chef who was in the back. Give my regards to Ayame-chan when she gets here. All right. See you later, Naruto. Tuchi called as his head popped out from the back. Naruto tossed a wave over his shoulder as he lifted the flaps on the restaurant and left. The blonde shinobi waved to several people as he walked by, recognizing them as the ones who respected him for his burden. As he made his way home, Naruto spotted Chuji, Shikamaru and Ino walking out of a shinobi store. Changing direction, the blonde made his way over to them. Hey guys, Naruto greeted as he stopped next to them. What's up, Naruto? Chuji asked as he hefted his new halberd on his shoulder. Not much, Naruto replied. Now that the Chunin exams are over, things have gotten pretty quiet. Yeah, it's also been a lot less troublesome now, Shikamaru said. Personally, he was glad those troublesome exams were over with. Now he could get back to his cloud watching. Everything is always troublesome for you, Shikamaru, Ino scolded him. Nah, just anything that actually requires me to work, the lazy Jonin replied. Ino scowled before turning her attention to Naruto. So what's this I've been hearing about you spending time with two foreign women? Being a gossip queen, Ino was quite curious to learn more about this. It had been the talk of nearly every girl in Konoha, first claiming that Naruto had been seen with a red-haired woman with rumors of it being the new Mizukage. Then there was the rumor of him spending time with a blonde woman, a Kumo Kunoichi at that, which then turned into him spending time with the two of them. Ino had been able to confirm those rumors when she had seen Naruto with the two women in question on his arm during the breaks in the Chunin exams, but wanted more information. She also would not deny to being jealous. Ino had tried multiple times to flirt with Naruto. After the young blonde's first council meeting as a clan head, her father Inoichi had let slip that Naruto had been placed under the CRA and would have to take multiple wives. As clan heir, it was necessary that Ino know about clan laws, so she knew about this almost as soon as Naruto's heritage had been revealed, but having her dad confirm it made her that much more determined to make the blonde shinobi hers. It hadn't worked out the way she had wanted. Naruto, while not being rude, had either turned down or redirected any attempts at her asking him for a date or any time she had tried to flirt with him. It had been a vexing experience for the blonde kunoichi, who was used to using her beauty on men in the village to get what she wanted. She had eventually stopped trying to get him and instead just focused on being his friend, though that did not mean that she did not feel jealousy towards those who had. Naruto blinked at the question before shrugging. He had known the moment those two appeared on his doorstep that word would get out, and with Ino being such a gossip her need to know would be insatiable. The red-haired woman was Mei Terumi the Godame Mizukage. And the blonde was Yujito ni, a Kumo Kunoichi and the Jinchuriki for the Nibi no Nakomata. The three with him gaped at him when they heard of the blonde's status. They knew that Naruto was a Jinchuriki, and in all honesty didn't care, but hearing about another one was always a surprise. They also happened to be two of the 4 women I plan on marrying, Naruto said. There was no way to hide that now that the 3 had been seen together. Not that there was much of a point anyway. Yujito was already a target for Akatsuki, so the information about her being his fiancée would not really mean much. And since she lived in Kumo, Danzo and his cohorts would be unable to make a move on her. And Mei was a Kage, meaning not only was she an S-rank ninja, but she also commanded several thousand other ninja. Akatsuki and Danzo would have to stupid to attempt trying to get her as a hostage. So you mean that you're marrying them? Ino asked in surprise. Hunches were all well and good, but hearing the rumors straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, was another thing entirely. Didn't I just say that? Naruto asked rhetorically. Seriously, why do some women like to repeat what he already said? Maybe Shikamaru had a point, some women were troublesome. Well, it's just surprising as all. Ino said in her defense. I suppose that's true, Naruto said. He had refused to give any information about who he planned on marrying, feeling that it was not only nobody's business but his and the women he was marrying. However, I've known them for several years now. One of them is a Kage and the other is Jinchuriki like yourself, Shikamaru muttered. He sounds like some kind of troublesome political arrangement. Naruto laughed at him. I suppose it would. To be honest, I never thought about it like that. I met both of them during my days traveling the elemental nations. He smiled a bit as his eyes glazed over in remembrance. Both of them had something that I not only love, but was unique and distinctive to just them, aside from the fact that they have unrivaled beauty even among other kunoichi. I'm not one to believe in destiny or fate or any of that bullshit, but I really do have to thank Kami for bringing me to them. The 3 ninja looked at the blonde who looked like one of those love-struck kids in some kind of drama show that Shikamaru's mom loved to watch. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Yoshino Nara sneezed as she watched her favorite soap opera. Someone's talking about me, she mumbled as she grabbed a tissue. If it's anything bad, they are going to get a beating from my frying pan. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Ino once again felt jealousy well up inside of her. It was clear as day that Naruto was utterly devoted to those two. When she had been chasing after Sasuke, and to a lesser extent and much more recently Naruto, she had hoped to see that look aimed at her. She sighed in disappointment. Naruto shrugged as he snapped himself out of his trance-like state. Though it will definitely help village relations with both Kumo and Kiri, still it's really only convenient and not something that matters. It still sounds troublesome, Shikamaru said. Naruto just rolled his eyes at the lazy Nara. The 4 continued talking for a while, switching the subject to a topic that did not involve the blonde's personal life when Naruto sensed movement behind him. Spinning around, he unsealed Susanoo and sent a wind blade into the black tigers. Both of them fell apart as the blade passed through them, and Naruto frowned when a smell hit his nose. Those things are made of ink. Looking around, Naruto spotted a figure on one of the roofs several meters away. Channeling chakra into his eyes, Naruto was able to get a good look at the figure. It was a boy around his age with short ink black hair, black eyes and very pale skin. He had a small backpack on him that Naruto assumed held the equipment he used to make those 2 ink beasts. He wore a short black jacket and also carried a tanto on his back under the pack. The rest of his outfit consisted of a high-collared shirt that exposed his midriff, black pants, shinobi sandals and gloves with his index finger and thumb exposed. In many ways the teen bore a strong physical resemblance to Sasuke Uchiha, however there was one major difference. Sasuke Uchiha always held a look of absolute hatred and utter loathing for his brother and people he believed were weak, as well as a desire for power and revenge. This boy's eyes held nothing, they had no emotion whatsoever. Naruto instantly knew that this boy worked for Danzo, who had a habit of turning his men into emotionless puppets. He was most likely sent here to test me, but why would he do it so openly? More important, what does Danzo gain by this? It's well known that I'm considered an S-rank ninja on par with a Kage, so he knows that anyone less than another S-class ninja could never really challenge me. Naruto shook his head. I don't have enough information on the man to make an accurate estimation of anything. I'll deal with this first and see what I can find out later. Naruto watched as the pale-skinned youth took a brush and began to write on the scroll that was in his lap. A few seconds later more of those ink tigers hot out. Ishikamaru! Naruto shouted at the lazy jonin, who just sighed and muttered a quick troublesome before going through several hand seals. Ninpo, Kage Nui no Jutsu. Ninja art, shadow sewing jutsu. The Nara heir's shadow shot up from the ground, impaling the ink tigers and allowing Naruto to continue moving. More ink beasts leapt at Naruto, who was about to skewer them with a wind blade, only for Chuji to enlarge his arm and slice them apart with his halberd. Nodding in thanks, Naruto continued, putting on a burst of speed that made him all but invisible. 6 more ink beasts came towards the blur that represented Naruto. With Susanoo still in hand, Naruto made several slashing motions as he passed them. He did not stop as the ink beasts burst back to their original state, reappearing in front of the pale-skinned youth. Naruto aimed a slash for his head. The young teen acted fast, whipping out his tanto and blocking Naruto's slash. However, he had not expected the strength behind the blonde's attack, and the ground under him cracked as he was pushed onto a knee. What strength? Thought Sai as he struggled to keep from being skewered. You know it's not very nice to attack a fellow leaf shinobi, Naruto said in his emotionless voice. Do so again and I will make sure you regret such a choice. My apologize, the black-haired teen said as he gave Naruto a smile that was so fake the blonde wanted to throw up. I was merely testing your skills as a shinobi, and I have to say with how terrible you are you must not have any balls. Naruto blinked, then blinked again as what the pale-skinned youth said. When it did, Naruto looked at the young man with a hard look, and for the first time in his life Sai felt a small chill run down his spine. Before the black-haired teen could do anything, Naruto exploded, sending him flying back and smashing into a wall where a large human-shaped crater formed under him. Sai pulled himself out of the way crater and shook his head to clear it of the ringing. Looking up, he saw Naruto staring at him from the roof where he had been previously. Blinking, he looked again and saw Naruto had disappeared. Sai frowned before sushioning to go report to Danzo. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto appeared within his home a few minutes after the confrontation. Walking down the stairs, Naruto entered his study. He began to open several drawers, searching for something his dad had been working on before the Kyuubi attack. Naruto frowned as he continued his search, wondering why he could not find it. Expanding his search, Naruto made several clones to go look through the library. Sitting down in his chair, Naruto took out some parchment, high-quality ink and a brush. While he waited for his clones, Naruto began to write out some of the ideas he had on new seals or modifications of previously existing seals. Hey boss. Naruto turned around in his seat just in time to catch a scroll that one of his Kage Bushins tossed to him. Turning the scroll over, the blonde saw that it was what he was looking for. Thanks, dispel yourself to alert the others. The clone nodded and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Turning back around, Naruto nipped his thumb and spread some blood across the seal. There was a slight hiss as his skin healed up and the seal disappeared in a puff of smoke. Unrolling the scroll, Naruto smiled as he saw the almost completed work. Setting it down, Naruto began to work. XXXXXXXXXXX. Oh make, dickless. My apologize, the black-haired teen said as he gave Naruto a smile that was so fake the blonde wanted to throw up. I was merely testing your skills as a shinobi, and I have to say with how terrible you are you must not have any balls, dickless. Naruto blinked. And how would you know if I have no balls or not? For that matter, why are you so interested in my dick? 'Cause you know, it's totally cool if you're into that kind of thing, but if that's the case you may want to go to Odo. I hear Orochimaru has a fetish for pale-skinned boys. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Within one of his many bases, Orochimaru sneezed. Someone must be talking about me, the pale-skinned man mused as he rubbed his nose. I hope I can use them for my experiments. Who cares if someone was talking about you, Sasuke scoffed. Now get back to training me. Of course Sasuke-kun, Orochimaru said as he licked his lips as he restarted training Sasuke. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Because of how pathetic you are, the pale teen replied with a smile. I see, Naruto said, nodding his head as if what the pale-skinned youth had told him explained it all. And how exactly am I pathetic? Naruto put more of his strength against Susanoo, making the tanto the pale teen was using begin to crack. Does it have something to do with strength, because if so we both know I'm stronger than you. Naruto used even more strength to shatter the other boy's blade. Spinning around he kicked the pale teen in the head, sending the boy flying. Or maybe it's that you don't think I have skill? Sai looked up to see Naruto in front of him. I assure you I have far more skill than you. Sai tried to create several ink beasts but the Naruto in front of him exploded, making the boy once again crash into a wall. Sai managed to get up just in time to see a sword heading for him to take his head off. He rolled to the left, only to get kicked in the face. Come on! Naruto said as he smashed another foot in the pale boy's face. What was this you were saying about me lacking balls? You can't even take a beating like a man. Naruto smashed a fist in Sai's face, making the boy stumble back. Don't insult people if you know things are not true. Naruto did a heel drop on Sai's shoulder, sending the teen into the ground and knocking him out. Naruto stood over the unconscious boy with a grin. You know I don't think you've had enough punishment yet. XXXXXXXXXXXX. The next morning Sai could be found still unconscious with people staring up at him, taking pictures as he hung from the flag pole. He was completely naked save his underwear, which was being used to hang him on said flag pole. On the boy's face, in red bold print were the words I like dicks written for everyone to see.